Anything that might be still pending?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the British Council, I am pleased to welcome you to the South Asia Leadership for Gender Equality Summit. At the dawn of a new decade, where much has changed around the world, our commitment towards an inclusive, equitable, and sustainable society remains an important priority. Although we've seen some progress on the Sustainable Development Goals on gender equality, much more needs to be done. The pandemic has also revealed that deep inequalities and gender gaps continue to exist. It's time to reflect on these challenges and work towards a more equitable future. With this as a background, I'm pleased to introduce the Leadership for Gender Equality Summit, which is a virtual two-day mega event curated against the backdrop of International Women's Day 2021. Through keynote addresses, panel discussions, fireside chats, and workshops, we aim to connect current and future leaders at the regional South Asia level, based on the diversity of their approaches, pursuit of positive social change, and commitment to the cause of gender equality. We will now start the event with the Women's Leadership Forum, which will draw insight into the experiences and ideas of South Asia's most influential leaders. We have an eminent panel of speakers consisting of Ms. Srilata Batliwala, Senior Advisor, Knowledge Building, Kriya, Dr. Sulochana Sigera, Founder, Women in Management, Ms. Nigat Dad, Executive Director, Digital Rights Foundation, and Dr. Salimul Haq, Director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development. The forum will be moderated by Ms. Vaishali Sinha, a leader in her own right. Vaishali is the Chief Sustainability, CSR, and Communications Officer at Renew Power, and is also the founding chair of the Renew Foundation. She serves as an independent woman director on the board of several leading corporates. She is a member of the Governing Council of the UN Global Compact Network India and chairperson of their Gender Committee. She is also the chairperson of South Asian Women in Energy, chair of CII's Indian Women Network and Women Empowerment Committee, and a member of the Governing Council of the Vedika Scholars Program for Women. In 2020, she was named in She the People's 40 over 40 list of women achievers for the year. We are really fortunate that she is moderating this panel today. Before I hand over the session to her, a few housekeeping rules for all of us. The session is for 50 minutes duration and it will end at 2:50. There will be a buzzer 5 minutes before the session is scheduled to end. There is a Q&A section in which the audience can put their questions. And I take this opportunity to inform the audience that the session is being recorded. Without further ado, I will now invite Ms. Vaishali Sinha to please take over the session.
Thank you, Deepa. And thank you for those wonderful introductions. I think that puts pressure on all of us to do more and to do better. So thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a real pleasure to meet you in the best possible way we can during these times. Let me begin by thanking the British Council for not only conceptualizing and hosting the Leadership for Gender Equality Summit, but also giving me the opportunity to be with and be in this august company. I'm delighted to be moderating this session and engaging in a conversation with each of the panelists, and more importantly, listening to each one of you. We all know that 2020 was a horror year, to put it mildly, with the global pandemic of unprecedented scale, unexpected. I don't think any of us really, expected this massive disruption, misery, and the kind of impact it really had on women. That was disproportionate. In many ways, the pandemic has taught us the value of an inclusive, equitable, and resilient socioeconomic structure to fortify us against other calamities of this sort if they would occur. It's always good to see a silver lining, and we are trying to do that. The new decade has dawned with fresh hope, and countries are now pressing the reset button. Now, as we build back better, we can no longer afford to push gender issues and concerns to the periphery. Women must be at the heart of this global recovery. I don't think any of us would disagree with that. We really have to tap the full potential.
Hello?
Yeah, hi, can I request people who are not speaking to be on mute, please? Thank you. Thank you. So anyway, we really need to tap the full potential of women. I think we all agree, and it's critical for us to be able to do that, to move onward and forward in this journey. In recent times, we have seen a lot more buzz and awareness around gender equality, and the truth is that we have covered a fair bit of ground when it comes to bridging the gender divide. It's important for all of us to take stock of where we have come. That's what motivates us actually to keep moving onwards more forcefully. In India, especially under the leadership of our Prime Minister, and we have definitely come out with a lot of policies to empower women, in the rural areas and even in the urban areas. So that's a shift in the right direction. Globally, we've seen the Nordic countries have set benchmarks for a lot of us to learn, study, and perhaps even emulate where possible. So there's so much to learn. And I think if we look at some statistics, we also will agree that we have a long way to go to ensure that women have equal access and opportunities when it comes to healthcare, education, skilling, participation in the economy, leadership positions, and the list is long. And, but, there are a few statistics that are particularly concerning when you look at women leaders. One thing which we see across is that very few women, be it the government, be it the private sector, are in few leadership roles. We need many more women to be up there, to make decisions, to frame policies, legislations, and, that's going to accelerate the journey we all want to be on. And we have seen it. I think each one of us have seen it. When women are in leadership positions, magic does happen, miracles happen, things get done better. And why deprive all of us of that benefit? What is worse is that few women at the top create a cycle, right? Where we have many more women coming up there too. So it's something to ponder about. And I think we need more role models. And we should all contribute as leaders towards that goal. Let me share just some data, and I know a lot of data is going to come up in our conversations, given the experts we have. Women are overrepresented in support functions like admin, while men tend to be leading in bottom line profit-driven roles, R&D, etc., which are crucial and which eventually lead to leadership positions. For example, in a company like ours, they're likely to become the CEO. In 2020, 40% of human resources directors are women compared to 17% of CMOs, 16% of chief information officers, etc. If I talk about India, and that's where we look at a lot of data, India has the third lowest global representation of women managers. That's not a good statistic. It's not a statistic any of us feel proud of. Only 8% of management roles were held by women, and only 2% of women were CEOs in India, right? Not very encouraging, though we have come a long way. Let's not forget that, but we still have a long way to travel. And so when you look at entrepreneurship, which is very critical in a world in which we live, only 11% of seed funding as per WEF was allocated to a woman founder. So it's a huge bias there as well. So lots of things to be fixed and lots of actions to be taken. And, we really need to focus on it as we, have this conversation. More importantly, as we work independently in our respective areas to do more to engage women in leadership positions. With that, what I want to do is, I don't want to take any more time talking about, the facts. I want to hear them from our esteemed set of panelists we have here. I will turn to our first speaker for this afternoon, Ms. Srilata Batliwala. Srilata, you're deeply involved with causes like gender, sexuality, and human rights, but you're also known to be a prominent face of the feminist movement in India. So there are a few areas I'd like to hear from you, and I promise you I'm not going to interrupt you for many minutes as you start speaking. So let me shoot the questions now. What does women leadership mean to you? You've written extensively about feminist leadership. How is this different from mainstream or women's leadership in general? Also, you've been closely associated with the grassroots movements in India, as you spoke about in the beginning. What role have women leaders played in enabling these movements? Over to you, Srilata.
Okay. Thank you, Vaishali. So I think I would start by responding to your first question and say that I actually make a very strong distinction between women's leadership and feminist leadership. They're not the same thing at all, because simply being a woman in leadership does not make you a feminist, let alone a feminist leader. Just as being the head of a social justice organization doesn't necessarily make you a socially just leader. There's a big difference, and I want to make this very clear at the outset, that we should not conflate these terms. We should not conflate the term women's leadership with the term feminist leadership, because simply occupying a female body and performing leadership in a deeply feudal, patriarchal, oppressive, domineering way, what are we really achieving? We get lots of women's bodies physically into different structures, whether they are corporate or government or civil society, and the performance of leadership continues in the same old way. I don't think there is, well, of course there's a point, because natural justice requires that there be equal representation of women in all structures, and that there can be no dispute about, and I'm certainly not questioning that. But I'm saying, what then? Because for me, the key distinction that I make, and which I think is at the heart of the notion of feminist leadership, is not what you're leading or that you are a leader. It is, why are you leading? What is the purpose of your leadership? And if your purpose as a feminist is to transform the world by dismantling not only structures that have oppressed women, such as patriarchy, but all the other oppressive structures that patriarchy works in close partnership with. Structures of class discrimination, caste discrimination, which we are still grappling with in South Asia, religious discrimination, discrimination against people because of their gender identity, their sexual expression, their age, their location, their language. We have thought of multiple different ways of discriminating against people and excluding them. So the purpose of leadership for a feminist has to be the transformation of these oppressive, discriminatory structures of power so that everyone is free, is liberated, is valued equally in society, so that everyone's potential, everyone's power, everyone's capacity can be expressed. So my goal is not to achieve leadership simply to prove that I can lead, or to have women gain leadership simply to say, okay, we now have 50% women, say in our parliament or heading our corporate world. But it is about how are they going to use that position and that role to change things. Now this, to answer your second question, is exactly what I both worked towards and saw very vividly in my grassroots work. Because the very first thing that happened when we started forming village level collectives, sanghas we used to call them, in Karnataka we call them sanghas, they're called samuhs, they're called by many different names in different parts of South Asia, was the women saying, now let us elect a president, a vice president, a secretary, and a treasurer. Now, why were they saying this? Because this is the classic hierarchical leadership model they had seen all around them. That's what they saw in the village panchayat or the village council. That's what they saw in government. That's what they saw in law enforcement machinery. That's what they saw in the workers' unions. So we said, no, let's experiment with something different. Let's try having a collective leadership model. Let's have a shared leadership model. Let's have rotating leadership. And then, of course, all these other challenges came up that even within a collective leadership, say 3 or 4 women playing that role for a given period of time, all those same power dynamics started getting reproduced. Those who had the power were also the ones who were, say, meeting the district collector or meeting the, police in charge for the district, or meeting the development officers and other officials for all their various needs and things that they were struggling with. And they then, of course, had internalized that if I'm a leader, then I have to act like that. So, for example, they started withholding information from the rest of the members of the group. And no, I will tell you later. That's that sort of thing. So we had to be on a constant process of challenging these patterns, of asking ourselves why, which would bring me, I've decided not to show my slides because of my limited time, but which brings me to what is at the very core of the concept of feminist leadership, which is about how do we share power, how do we share information, and how do we share the process of leading change? 1, and 2, perhaps even more importantly, that the process of transformation, of transforming the world, you are a site of transformation. Because within you are embedded and internalized those same power dynamics of which you may be a victim in one relationship, or which have acted on you in oppressive ways in other relationships, but you reproduce them as a way of gaining a little bit of power, a little bit of advantage over others. So if we don't see the process of transformation as beginning from within me, from within myself, of examining my biases, my practices, my ability to practice what I'm preaching, there is no hope of changing the world if we don't become sites of change. Let me stop there.
Thank you, Srilata. You've made some very, very thought-provoking points and some corrections. And we've noted the corrections as you started, which is feminist leadership versus women leadership, right? And very important for us. Okay.
Different. It's not.
They're different. They're different. Yeah. And it's important. I see that in climate all the time. You know, we have to be able to be clear about the terms we're using and the context in which we're using these terms. So that's important. And we all have to look at the purpose of leadership, right? Not leadership for the sake of leadership. And patriarchy and, other sort of barriers need to be addressed, and we need to look at flatter structures versus hierarchy. So all great points, and thank you for making them. I just wanted to ask one very quick, and if you can respond to it quickly before I go to the next person, is that in your samoos which you formed, did you actually find the women empowered, or did you feel that they were fronts? Because we see that a lot in areas we work in, that there are women who are implementing programs, but they're not the ones who are really empowered. Did you see that in the work you do? You're on mute, Srilata.
Initially, yes, but that is, in fact, that was one of our main goals, was to help women to get in touch with the power within, what we call the power within. That power is not just something that's outside us and acting on us, but we also have power within us. But because of our, social settings and the norms, etc., that power within us is often not activated or are not allowed to be expressed and utilized. So the whole point of the Samoo was that it became a space where they could activate that power and express it, even sometimes in the very smallest of ways. Writing a song about the change they wanted to see, doing an exercise which was about their dream, their vision for a better society, where each and every voice counted, each and every individual's image counts. So initially, yes, but it was a very short-lived period, and very rapidly, almost all of them became empowered.
Good. Thanks. And
because they got the space.
Excellent. Yeah. And perhaps you can spread this effect in other parts of the country as well, in different ways. I think that'll be quite useful. Thank you so much, Srilata, for your comments. I will now move to Ms. Sulochana Segera from Sri Lanka. Dr. Segera, you have worked extensively as a mentor and advisor working with businesses to ensure they have a more gender diverse and inclusive management at the top. In your view, where do women leaders have the greatest impact? How do they make a difference to organizations? And is their leadership style different from that of men? Like, just from your firsthand experience, what is your observation? Over to you for your comments.
Thank you. And Srilata put the platform correctly, saying leadership on the feminine leadership and women leadership is too different. But my concept is leadership has no gender. Empowerment also has no gender. I do not know why when we speak about women, we say women leadership. But when we speak about men, we don't call it men leadership program. But for women, we put women leadership program. So the thing is, leadership has no gender. It's the way you approach and make decisions is the difference. It's a biological difference, and also it's a thinking and the value system difference comes when it comes to leadership style. So what I've seen is just clicking a gender on a corporate, this thing that we have so many women in this board, it's not going to make a difference, right? It's what you bring to that board. What are the skills and the competencies which is bringing to the board that matters. Sometimes we just wanted to get our companies with saying that we have 2 female in our board, or our corporate leadership, we have so many women. But are they really representing what the caliber of the results, right? We had to look at the end of the day, the corporates runs with the results. So the results are actually showing off you with that there's a because there was a diverse management, there was a diverse board, that the results were changed. So this is what I think many corporates look at now. Even though I know India has quotas and I think Bangladesh also has quotas, Sri Lanka is not yet has come to quotas, because there are two minds of this. Because Sri Lankan, the debate was, do we women want it to be a quota for us to be in the board, or are we looking at the professionalism? Which I think, for one thing I would agree is, yes, sometimes you need quotas just to ensure that they put up their mindset and understand you need it. But then again, the argument comes, are they really taking women to represent the company benefit, or if it is someone known to you? So these things has been debated in Sri Lanka. I'll just give you the background of Sri Lankan leadership in corporate. So basically, Sri Lankan active economic population is just 8.4 million, right? From that, if you look at it, the contribution from the female participation in the economy is 35 to 36% in Sri Lanka, while our literacy is 92.6%, and our university approach is 60 to 70%. Sadly, only 35, that also mainly on the informal sector. So if there is a choice, many of the universities, when we do research, when we ask why you do not want to come back to work, so they say this is our choice. So we have only 5% female CEOs in Sri Lanka, right? So it's not just, having the percentage of so many literacy or so many professionals or so many educated. It's whether they are keen to get into that top management. Now it's changing, because in Sri Lanka now, it's not about board is requesting, women are ready to get into the boards. And the approach is, they do not want it to be just the female. They are saying they are not competing with men. That's where the women should also make the mark. We should compete with our competencies, not with another gender. And what we have seen in Sri Lankan corporate leadership is, females are more onto they have more professional qualifications. Like we have 60% of our females in the corporate are professionals. They are 60%, right? So they have professional qualification. And highest number of female who are getting educated are from lawyers to finance and to doctors. So they are still going on those traditional qualifications. But now the supply chain and all that are coming. What my concept, if we look at the global and Sri Lankan concept, now the hierarchy level of this, it's a flat hierarchy. Most of the companies are practicing. And also when you see a lady coming into the board, she ensures that the success are also being groomed. And even though the gender is not an issue, but they will prefer a female gender, because if a lady failed, that it's not only her she's failing, that all the ladies will not be able to hold that position. That's that's a myth which is coming back. So sometimes I would say it's been very hard for a female. We say it's hard to go top, but I say it's hard to retain on top, because people will support you to go to the top, to go into the board. But to be in that board, to retain your leadership styles is the most difficult thing, because your support system is not there. So I think the timing is limited, but I'll end up saying this. The day actually all this discussion stop using women leadership, empowerment for women and all that, then we will be a neutral. It's about leadership. It's about empowerment. It's not about female or male leadership or empowerment of female. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sulochana. It was, I think you make some very good points. And first of all, I want to congratulate you on, the literacy rates which we see in Sri Lanka. It's good to know that women are doing so well. You made a point on women, 2 points, which I thought were very interesting. One is that they don't want to go to the top management, right? They don't want to go there. Sometimes I think about that and I wonder why. Is it because they have too much on their plate already, and so they find it difficult to manage? And should we think about, trying to perhaps do something about it? When we talk about it, we look at, for example, parenting is the biggest sort of, barrier. And it's very, very sort of, it leans heavily on women, and they, especially in the corporate sector, I've had 2 kids in, countries like New York and London, and it's very demanding. And, you really need to take on a lot of burden. Is that, do you think, a reason why women resist the kind of burden they have beyond work, whereas men enjoy? If I could, I know we don't have to look, this panel is not in favor of looking at men and women, but this is a fact. When we look at mentorship, I see around me firsthand, men have mentorship opportunities in after hours, in happy hours. Women have to get back home and take care of the homeworks, etc. And that's the reality, whatever we may say. And if we don't change that, nothing's going to change for women. We really need women to step it up at work, and for men to step it up at home a little bit, and the ecosystem to make it possible for women also to enjoy the success which is waiting for them at the workplace. What are your views on mentorship? And you did say that, women are very good at nurturing and they should do more. But do you agree that that's perhaps a reason why women are not able to stay at the top?
So while I was doing mentoring, so I have seen 2 segments. One is the young mentoring and one is already in the middle age. So what I've seen is, it's something, yes, the childcare, the parenting, they are already in the plate. When it comes to Asia, it's there, right? Even though it's system change, it's inside us. It's been from the birth, it has told that you are being into that. So it's almost in our subconscious. That is one of the major reasons. But I would say this, what I've seen is the women has made their own choice that they will rather invest the money they are spending on mentoring for themselves, for their children and family, right? So there is a monetary value also. Because when I have asked, you are so skilled, you have that background, you have that experience, why not go to this mentoring and get into it? Then she will always put 2 into 2 and see what's the best for her and what's the best for the children and the family. Then she made the choice. So women subconsciously make choices in favor of others than herself. So this is, I have seen very much with the middle age. But when I do mentoring for young people, they will ask, how many years for me to there? Then they will ask, what are the skills need to be for that portion? They will go on that and they will get it. They will not wait for that 5 years experience, 6 years. The routine will be work. And she will go the other way around, because for her, it's not a choice. This is what I wanted to get. But for a middle-aged person, it's a choice, whether I'll choose this or that. So 2 different because I have seen millennials are changing, that they are more onto themselves, but when the middle-aged people, women, especially women, they will prefer it given to someone young. True. So they have asked and said, now why? I think I have done enough. So now what? So I have seen that.
Very true. And I guess it's got to do with the conditioning, the way I think, girls were raised. I think it's changing now. I have a 22-year-old. I see a lot. I can tell you it's changing big time. I worry about my son sometimes, but it's changing, and I'm so proud of the change we are seeing. So thank you for your comments. I will now turn to Ms. Dad. You're an accomplished lawyer and a human rights activist from Pakistan. It's such a pleasure to meet you and have an opportunity to chat with you. Nigat, you're known to be a digital crusader. You champion causes like free access to internet, digital security for women, helping women bridge the digital divide, etc. It must be challenging, as in your country, as we see in a bunch of the other South Asian countries, there is a fair bit of restriction which have been imposed, and imposed particularly so on women, right? We all agree that, the world has turned virtual, and so it's quite critical for all of us to have freedom in this area. So, and especially in the post-pandemic world, during the pandemic as well, I mean, what would we do without technology? And I often say, what would we do without energy and clean energy as well? Because, you know, these are all continuous sources which we've all heavily relied on during these times. You know, so in this world, I wanted to, and in these times, you know, how can we bridge this divide? What is it that we can do to address this issue? And also, what are the strategies which are required for different stakeholders to make this possible, to dismantle the barriers, so that we can all benefit from the digital revolution?
Great, thank you so much. So first of all, I would like to say that, you know, when and would like to share my own experience that when I started working on digital rights or technology and human rights in Pakistan, there were not many women, actually no woman working specifically or targeting this topic. There were technology, the sector around technology or IT sector is very male dominated. And I would go to say that, you know, like around the globe, we see like a lot of men basically occupy the leadership positions when it comes to technology. And my aim was, I mean, I worked with, you know, different people, mostly male bosses. And at the end of the day, I thought that I think we need to create a space for ourselves where women actually lead these conversations and sort of think about technology from feminist lens. And you know, this basically takes me to the conversation with which Ma'am Srilata basically said, that there is a specific difference between when we say women leadership and feminist leadership. Because when I started working on digital rights in Pakistan, I actually recognize myself as a feminist leader. But trust me, that's not easy to be a feminist leader, because all the internalized patriarchy basically, you know, push you to do things in masculine way. And you keep challenging yourself that, no, I have to do this thing from this particular way, with empathy, from the justice angle, with the angle of equity. And it's hard when you live in a patriarchal society, and when you have seen people around you behaving in most of the time in masculine ways. It's hard to pave that way. So I would say it's a struggle for feminist leaders like me, not just to pave way for yourself and set the right precedent, but also pave way for the women who are working with you and create a space for them so that they can be in the leadership position as well, without taking into account the hierarchies and, you know, the different structural setups that we have seen all our lives in our workplaces. So that's one thing. And I'm still struggling. I try my best. It's hard. But you know, I mean, there's a way to do it. But with regards to your second question around digital divide, I would call it's like a gender digital divide. It's an emergency at the moment, especially in our countries where we talk about no access to internet or rare access to technology and information technology, but we hardly talk about the gender, you know, like how this gap into in accessing technology and internet in Pakistan, in India, in Bangladesh, in Nepal, impact women and marginalized bodies. We don't even think about vulnerable and marginalized bodies, and that's not part of our conversations. During pandemic, what we have seen that the governments had more focus on making laws and regulations or regulating internet, or you know, and making IT laws and stuff, but very less focus on how to make internet accessible to the woman. And especially in Pakistan, what we saw, and probably that's the case in India and Bangladesh as well, that when people went online for e-learning, we didn't even look into our internet penetration, you know, that how much we have it in our countries. In Pakistan, it was 22%, and during pandemic it went up to 35%. And women went back, especially those women who were studying in cities, in colleges, universities, living in hostels, had to go back to their villages and towns. And they had no access to internet. Most of the towns, villages have no good access to internet so that they can be online and continue with their education. Men still had that privilege to go outside of their home and find the internet connection and get connected and, you know, do whatever they want to do. But women who were not allowed to step outside of their home were not, you know, were not able to access. So I think these are the angles that we really, really need to look into. And this is the new world order that we are living in, especially in pandemic. So I think these are the things that the governments and also civil society really need to look into and think from the intersectional point of view when we talk about technology and its access to people.
Great. No, thank you so much for doing what you do. And thank you for bringing attention to such an important topic. And that is the future, I think. And we have to make sure that women are at the heart of this, because if they are not, they're not going to be a part of the fourth industrial revolution, which is staring at us, right? So thank you for doing what you do, as I said. And I know there are deep-rooted issues of patriarchy, masculinity, and all of that. And I think that is a fight which goes beyond technology. Sometimes I feel it shouldn't be a fight. It should, if we do it with friendship, I think we'll be more successful. And that's what we all try to do. But it's an issue we really need to address. So thank you so much, Ms. Dutt, for really kind of flagging it as an emergency. Another area of emergency is climate change. And that brings me to Dr. Haq. It's a privilege to have you on this panel. And you know, when we talk about climate change, there's absolutely no doubt that women are at the heart of it in not a positive way as we would like it, but in a rather negative way. So how can we get more women at the heart of policy making and ensure that, you know, they get less impacted negatively and benefited more positively as we sort of advance in this whole climate change, energy transition zone?
Thank you very much, Vaishala, and thank you for inviting me to be here. It's a privilege to be the only male on this panel, but I am absolutely one of you feminists as well. So I'm a male feminist, as you said. It doesn't have to be only women. What I will try and do is to share with you some of the experience that has happened in my country, Bangladesh. As you know, I'm the director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development at the Independent University, Bangladesh. And we in Bangladesh are now currently observing our 50th anniversary as an independent country. And so a lot of celebrations going on for that change. And just a few days ago, a very eminent columnist in the New York Times, Nicholas Kristof, wrote a column in the New York Times aimed at President Biden, advising President Biden on how to tackle poverty in the United States. And his message was, learn from Bangladesh. In the last 50 years, Bangladesh has actually demonstrated a very significant improvement in development, in poverty alleviation, and in women and gender issues. Still a long way to go. We are not perfect, but I am a glass half full rather than half empty person. And the question then is, how do we fill it even more and keep filling it more in terms of what to do next? And Nicholas Kristof's analysis of what made the difference in Bangladesh was two things. And in my view, they're the same thing. He says education and focus on girls. And I would say education of girls was what changed and made the difference in Bangladesh. And the other key component of that is not just the numbers. Numbers are important. I don't want to disqualify having sufficient numbers of women in the different arenas in education, as well as in the workplace, as well as in senior positions. But at the same time, it's an attitude change of the men. And that to me is a key element. You know, if we don't change men, then it remains to a large extent tokenism. as a number of our previous panelists have already said. How do we make it go beyond tokenism? And speaking as a man, in Bangladesh, we're a Muslim country. Culturally, we are also patriarchal. We have all these, remnants of culture that have suppressed women's emancipation and education and moving in the workforce. But nevertheless, we have been able to overcome to a very large extent. And I'm very, very hopeful to come to your question about the context of climate change, which is a brand new problem that has now emerged. And particularly for us in the region, South Asia, it's going to be a big problem. For Bangladesh in particular, it is already a very big problem. And as you quite rightly pointed out, the victims are largely women. There's a disproportionate number of women victims in the most vulnerable groups. And so we need to be taking that into account. But I'm very myself positive and optimistic that based on what we have been able to do already in terms of educating and empowering women in our country over the last generation, the next generation, we will also be able to do the same. And I think, one of the big differences in the way we need to approach this is on leadership. I think we need to now focus on gender sensitive leaders, be they men or women. It is not counting the number of women. It's the way in which the leadership is exhibited in supporting equal opportunities for men and women going forward, from young girls in schools all the way to women in the workplace and working at home, and giving them due respect, even if they're just staying at home and not in the formal workplace. And so that to me is a really big challenge, a cultural shift, educational shift, making boys and men equally feminist and recognizing that they have a big role to play and that they have a big responsibility to take this issue as seriously as women, and not to put it into the box of just helping women empower themselves. That I'm not against that, but I'm saying we should not confine ourselves to that, and we need to be breaking out of that. So the final point I'll make in the context of how do we tackle climate change? In my view, we will tackle climate change with investing in educating our young girls of today. The young girls of their mothers got educated in the last generation and have shown that they can contribute very substantially to the country, both economically as well as culturally and socially. The next generation has the opportunity to do that as well, but a different kind of education. And I like Nigat's attitude. We're in a different world now. Even in a COVID-19, we are in a Zoom world. We're talking to each other. This is where young people can really make a big difference. Doesn't matter where you're located in Dhaka or in Delhi or in Islamabad. You can become a global person. You can engage in global IT and other kinds of information and sharing. And young people have the ability to do that. The world is, their oyster. And we need to be giving them the support and education that enables them to do that. Unfortunately, the kind of education we're giving them is really the wrong kind. We're giving them, pass exams, get a job type of education, which is really not fit for purpose anymore, either boys or girls. But if we can change our system of education and empower them to be problem solvers, to be inquisitive, to be innovators, to take the initiative themselves, and then as a society, support them for taking those initiatives, even if some fail and some succeed. It doesn't matter. Making them take risks, being innovators, to me, is the way forward. And I do believe that in this region in South Asia, we have the wherewithal within a generation. This is not going to happen overnight. We're talking 10 years or 15 years from now. But if we start the investment now, then I think we will get the dividends, and it'll be a huge dividend within a matter of a decade if we can invest in our young people, both boys and girls, but with an emphasis on girls. I'll stop there for now.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Haq. And I've heard stories in Bangladesh, how, supporting the girls in schools really got the boys, left behind. And that's something for us to learn. Not that we want to do that, but we need to do that a little bit just to make sure that from a positive point of view, we are encouraging women. We are showing the confidence in them as we must, because I think, in India also we see, and I hope, some of you would agree that, girls definitely are outstanding when it comes to the 10th and 12th grade, results. The merit listers dominated by girls. But when you look at the confidence with which they step out in the world, they're not as confident. And we need the confidence to succeed and solve the problems. And I think they fear failing because they feel that if they fail, whatever little they have is also not going to be theirs. So really great points you've made, super learnings. And I know I'm cognizant of the time we have. We don't have much time left. So what I'm going to do is I've browsed through the questions, but Deepa, you may come in. One question which I'll open to anybody on the panel is that, we have real experts and accomplished panelists from South Asia. What is it that we can do together to make sure we can have a shared learning and we can share our learnings from one part of one country to another so that, we can hope to have a better South Asia, especially when it pertains to, women and the role they can play. So I know we have, Deepa, please come in and tell me, I think we have 1 minute to wrap up the session, or is there some flexibility around that?
That's right, Vaishali, 1 minute to go and the next panel is all prepped and ready.
Okay, got it. So any one person can take this very quickly. Sorry about that. And we can take your comments and circulate it later on. Yes, Srilata, please go ahead.
I feel ready to jump in on this because I
please
really
do.
Strongly about it. So thank you so much for giving us that as the final question. I think really one very concrete thing that we need to do that we haven't done, at least not very effectively, is we need to create a shared resource pool of the stories of change, documenting the different obstacles and barriers that women face, that people of other gender identities face, documenting stories of innovative leadership practices, but we need it as a shared resource,
Yeah, sure.
So that we can begin to analyze and develop strategies with a much larger knowledge base.
True. And that's a great point. And I think with technology, as Nigat pointed out, I'm sure we can do it. It's not like I lead South Asian Women in Energy Forum, and we are doing that for energy. We can do it broadly speaking for gender as well. And so we can perhaps work on that later today. I know it's 2:50. I want to be on time. I just want to leave all of us with the thoughts, and especially the audience, those in the audience, we owe it to ourselves to ask for what we want. And we should be prepared to go and get it, not only get it, grab it. That's when we'll move ahead in the right direction. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for doing what you do. You're extremely inspiring. I've been inspired so much by your comments. Thank you for joining this panel, and thank you to the Council for hosting this wonderful session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vaishali, and thank you to all the panelists, for your insightful comments on the topic. I wish we'd had more time, but I think for all forums, we feel that we should have had more time and to discuss this further. But a heartfelt thanks on behalf of the British Council to everybody, and Vaishali for expertly steering this conversation and bringing in so many interesting comments. We had about 720 people who have tuned in to listen to this forum. So, I think that's testimony to how, profound and really insightful your feedback has been. So we're going to move to the next session, and
it's I think
thank you so much.
Out. Yeah, bye-bye. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. So the next session is the first fireside chat of the summit, and it's titled "The Pandemic's Differential Impact on Gender Equality: Insight into Socio-Economic Realities in South Asia." For most of 2020, the world has grappled with the devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on human life, society, and economy. The crisis has upended decades of progress, with combined health and economic shocks taking a toll on the lives and livelihoods of millions of people, disrupting business activities and exposing existing fault lines in social, economic, and health systems. The pandemic has forced us to face problems we have ignored for too long, and the existing inequities, fragilities, and unsustainable practices intensified its impact. So the poor and vulnerable have been the worst hit, and the pandemic is threatening to push millions more into poverty. This fireside chat will attempt to give us a bit more insight into what these challenges have been through the experiences of our speakers, Dr. Rashid Bajwa and Ms. Kalki Subramaniam, who are very well placed to share these insights. A very quick introduction to the speakers. Dr. Bajwa is the CEO of Pakistan's National Rural Support Program and oversees the largest rural development operations in the country. He is an expert on financial inclusions and has held many high positions as the chairman of Pakistan Microfinance Network, the member of State Bank of Pakistan's Committee on Rural Finance, and member of the General Body of Pakistan Poverty Alleviation Fund and the Sindh Rural Support Program. Our second speaker, Kalki Subramaniam, is an Indian transgender activist, artist, poet, actor, and inspirational speaker. She is the founder of Sahodri Foundation, an organization which works for the social, political, and economic empowerment of transgender people in India. She has received several awards for her contribution towards transgender rights. She has initiated the Trans Heart Project with a mission to reach out to 10,000 transgender people to encourage and train them to paint their untold stories on canvas. Kalki was also conferred the International Ambassador of Trans Amsterdam Organization. To moderate this session, we have Dr. Director, British Council, East and Northeast India. In his 16-year stint with the British Council, he has led many programs on education, development, cultural collaboration, communications, and advocacy programs in India, South Asia, and internationally. He is one of the trustees of the International Language and Development Conference and sits on the research advisory boards of the University of Reading. His views on a range of proximate disciplines in the arts and on issues in contemporary culture and education are sought by media houses in India and abroad. So I'm very pleased to hand over to Dr. Debanjan. Over to you, Debanjan.
Hi, am I audible? Can I just have a quick check of that? Thank you very much, Deepa, for this session, and a big thanks to you and to colleagues in CSR Box for organizing this summit and this particular fireside chat. I think one of the things, a very interesting saying that went around the world was at the beginning of the pandemic was a wonderful illustration which went with the saying that we are all in the same storm, but we are in different boats. And I think the question of the impact of the pandemic on the differential impact on gender and particularly on women and non-binary and transgender friends and colleagues is something that we need to sort of discuss in detail. From a very personal, from personal observations, I think I've seen at home. I mean, my wife is a senior academic. We have a 15-year-old daughter, and all three of us are working, studying from home. But I think I've seen from close quarters how much more involved and complicated and difficult it has been for my wife to deal with the pandemic. And we have heard stories from across our British Council network from colleagues about how much more difficult it is in multi-generational households, for instance, for single colleagues, particularly women, and colleagues with very different kind of identities. We've heard reports from Bangladesh that access to healthcare was particularly difficult at the beginning of the pandemic for transgender and non-binary friends and colleagues. So I think with those opening remarks, I'd really like to invite Dr. Bajwa to give us his insights into how the pandemic has impacted us very differently across gender and identity lines. Over to
Thank you, Doctor. And a big thanks to the British Council for arranging this very important discussion and a dialogue. I will start by acknowledging myself that during this pandemic, as Dr. Devanand is saying, you know, before the pandemic, men who work and who have housewives, they do not even realize the amount of work women do at home. And, you know, there are weekends, but then weekends are not the real normal ways days in which women work. I mean, they have separate systems for weekends when the husband is here. But on a weekday, I am amazed at my wife at how busy she is right from the morning till the evening. And it has actually led to my understanding more about the kind of labor which housewives put in and their contribution. But this is just a start of. I'll start with a screen sharing. I have a PowerPoint and I will quickly go to it. I hope everybody is able to see that. So we're talking about the pandemic and the differential impact on gender equality. And we've seen that economic downturns have always affected women more than men. So this is something which we all understand. And these, we call them gendered impact, linger long after the economy recovers. And this is again being experienced during this COVID-19, but perhaps far more acutely. And perhaps this is because women dominate in works and industries that are susceptible to such cycles. I'm particularly very keen to know about microfinance and the micro and small medium enterprises and the enterprise development, where there was a huge number of women who were working, contribute in these sectors. And of course, these sectors, in particularly when you look at microfinance, they're mostly related to work in retail businesses and in health related, even education. And then of course, textile and garment and tourism and others. I went through this very interesting slide. This was made by IFC, that these are the three key areas where impact have happened on the financial sector and the enterprises. One is the policy level, the financial sectors, and then the enterprises themselves. And then we've seen that there has been a direct impact on the enterprises, particularly women-based enterprises. So one of the things is that the credits have dried down. We have seen governments coming in and providing some help, but that help has been marginal. There are now financial institutions like the banks, they have reduced their time. That is also adding to the woes. And then of course, sectors like tourism and other areas have actually affected. In terms of financial sector, we know that for sure that although the commercial banks have given some SME loans, and there has been a moratorium on debt repayments, it happened in my country as well. But that has actually added to a double burden, because now when this moratorium is over, now the institutions are coming back and asking for money from clients, mostly women, who have lost their businesses. So they are now in a double jeopardy, and it has created a new wave of impact, a negative impact on their social lives as well. So here they were trying to go out and make a better living for themselves and for their families, and now they come back into double jeopardized situation. We have seen this happening in the micro and small medium enterprises also. There has been disruptions both in the supply chain as well as in demand. So So agriculture businesses, manufacturing, textiles, there have been huge disruptions. But added to the problem is that there is very little demand on retail, tourism, housing, and logistics. And retail, for example, small shops, small vendors, mostly women, they are suffering more than, of course, the men. So now, when you look at the gender gaps, we see that although there was already a gender gap in the band which we call the extremely poor people, and these are the numbers which show that for every 100 men, how many poor women are there, and we see that that trend will perhaps increase, and women in South Asia are expected to be even more adversely affected. And then there will be 129 women as against 100 men within like the next 10 to 15 years. And it shows that the women's risk of falling into poverty is obviously greater when they are, and they're more likely to have, particularly when they have young children at home to care for. And the risk remains even more additional and at the later adulthood stages. I'll refer back to the discussion in the earlier panel that how women are adversely being affected. And I'll at the end also give some policy recommendations based on that. So basically, this lockdown has also added gender-based domestic violence, honor killing, and it has also, not only just in Pakistan, but worldwide, this immobility and a decline in economic activity has led to depression, aggression, and violent behaviors from the men towards the women. Pakistan, like other countries, have closed their schools. This is the third wave of the pandemic, and the schools remain, again, many parts of the country have been locked down. Perhaps more are going to be locked down pretty soon. So and then there are, of course, the barriers to accessing online classes, particularly in rural areas and in poor communities where there is no electricity, what to talk about internet connectivity. And then reports are also indicating that this financial vulnerability has led parents to pull the children out of schools, and guess who are the first group? Obviously the daughters, which are being pulling out of the school. And the domestic burdens on women have also increased because now the family members are now restricted. Earlier on, obviously, everybody would go out and the woman would have time to clean and do her chores. But here we are that now the family continues to stay there. And that has also opened up a lot of issues. In my country, 70% of women are in the informal sector, mostly housewives, and the ones who have been working, they've lost jobs during the pandemic, and many women in rural areas have lost significance in income, as I explained, due to inability to sell the products. So I explained this, this chart of IFC. And OECD is stating that in Pakistan, it is also the case that poor single and widowed women face additional difficulties in gaining access to social safety net programs. We do have a big social safety net program called Exas. We are giving about 2,000 rupees, which comes to about around about $20 per month as a stipend to women. And there was a emergency cash grant also given to a cohort of like maybe 20% of the poorest women families in the country. That did help, but to what extent it has helped is an issue, because the problem is that it is easy to give a cash grant. It is more difficult to start a closed business. And that is the problem which we are facing at the moment, these micro enterprises that has been closed. And not only have they been closed, they are being pushed by the lenders to pay back. So that is the double jeopardy I was talking. The Human Rights Campaign has released a research showing how the lives and livelihoods of the LGBTQ community are particularly at risk due to, and their findings are their jobs have absolutely been decimated, and obviously they are less likely to have any new health cover, and they're more likely to have chronic diseases as a result. And in the general population, as we compare the LGBTQ community, obviously they're faring much worse than the general population, although the general population is not they're also being affected. But they're more likely to feel that their personal finances are currently worse. So, and their spending, of course, has become less. And they are, of course, but they are also proactive in responding to the pandemic. I mean, we've seen these groups which are going on and giving kind of awareness campaigns to people that the same things, washing of hands, putting in masks and others. And they are more likely to trust public health and medical authorities like the doctor, WHO and the NIH. So they are more forthcoming. This is very interesting that they are forthcoming in this pandemic. Then what is the way forward? I mean, the one thing which you need is that the gender disaggregated data for women and other social groups for targeting intervention and policy needs to be there. Healthcare facilities have to be geared up, and particularly these masks and protective gears. And then, of course, protection and shelter services for victims of domestic abuse. Because the abuse has increased, but there is no where to go. And that's another very difficult situation. And then, of course, providing financial and technical support to enterprise owned by women, as I was explaining. And then, of course, the sexual and reproductive health services. Ensuring water and sanitation facilities to be including women leaders in policy making, providing hygiene kits, establishing food banks, and women receive assistance at their doorsteps instead at their public places. Most of the time now they're making digital payments, and to women who are unfortunately uneducated. So there is this mismatch, as was being explained earlier on as well. Now, at the public policy level, these are the few things which I think are very critical to know. One is, of course, that there has to be women, that pro-women policies must be embedded. So we should talk about pro-women policies rather than gender-neutral policies. This is the change which I think is very important, and it needs to be presented. And the goal should be gender equity and not just equality. And these are the two examples that, changing hiring practices instead of hiring women. It's not just enough to hire women. It's also important that we do the proper practices of how hiring is done. And like, for example, generally we say that 30% of women in workplace in an organization, when even if there is this number, we still need to show how many males are there and how much do they dominate, and how men favor men as compared to women. And then in COVID, particularly, women were and are disproportionately burdened. I've explained to you my own experience, work from home, including taking care of children and education. Mobility has been further compromised in an environment where there was already very little mobility, and businesses affected, especially at the micro level, and has put an additional burden of women to pay back. And then how to remotely help women, as we still are in a wave, the third wave within the current confines. Lastly, I think,
sorry to interrupt,
just one more sentence. The discussion needs to also look at how women, the only way out is when women participate at the political level, to me. And the only way out is having separate women electorates for women. If there is a parliament of 100 members, there's actually a parliament of 200 members, 100 for women and 100 for men. That is how this world is going to be changed. Thank you very much. And I will be happy to ask this question. This last comment was just mine, just to add on.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for that wonderful overview of the situation from your perspective, especially the economic impact. I think the point you made about the economic downturn and the impact is that had both the double jeopardy you mentioned about and the impact on women entrepreneurs is really strikes me as significant. I think the impact on the informal sector of work, I think, has something that has come up across South Asia very strongly. And I think one of the things that really struck me very hard personally was, and this is a point that I hadn't thought of before, is as an impact of the economic downturn, girls are being pulled out of education systems. And that is really heartbreaking, and as well as for societal progress. I think we will come back. I think our viewers have lots of questions on that. But before that, may I invite Kalki Subramaniam to share her thoughts on how the pandemic has impacted the transgender and non-binary community. Welcome, Kalki, to this program. It's a great pleasure having you with us. You're on mute.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for introducing and asking me to speak. I think coming from the transgender community in India and being an activist and working with the community for more than 15 years now, the lockdown, the pandemic has been really a very, very big shocker, as well as a factor of economic collapse for the community. If you look at the transgender community in Asia, particularly whether it's India, Pakistan, or Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, in countries like these, the transgender community is mostly living in poverty. Most of them are because of the social discrimination and stigma that prevails in all the countries and also in our country. Because of that, many transgender people were homeless, have already been homeless. Many of them have been pushed away from our families due to, the narrow gender binary system and the patriarchy that we already have. Has pushed us out of our homes, out of our family. And because of that factor alone, the community has not been able to continue their education at school. So majority of the community people, more than 70% of them, but we don't have statistics. There are no proper statistics, but what I'm saying is from my own experiences that more than 70% of the transgender community are school dropouts. And because of being a school dropouts, they're not eligible to go for white collar jobs. And that doesn't mean they can actually go for blue collar jobs. Even then, that's very difficult because the community, the discrimination that prevails, the narrow-mindedness in our society across Asia, and of course, in many countries around the world, because of the narrow-mindedness that exists, and because of the patriarchy that exists on gender identities and gender equality and transgender people and gender non-binary people, it has affected our transgender community at a very, very, at all levels, I would say. But mostly the drastic affected areas were definitely economic areas. How would they actually live was a big question. How would they live everyday life? Because for most people, they were all earning every day. It's like a coolie. They just go, many of them were sex workers. Many of them were begging and collecting money and all that. So when the lockdown happened, the transport system stopped. And because of that, they couldn't go to the trains and they couldn't go to shops, and that was done. And because of that fact, also because of the lockdown and the pandemic, sex work, going for sex work also stopped. Social distance was mandatory. And the lockdown, the pandemic affected the transgender community so drastically that they were totally immobile and muted, voiceless. And fortunately, what actually the government did try to help, but they could intervene in only certain areas, like in the health and during giving some compensations as money, currency compensations and all that only could happen. Otherwise, any alternative jobs or anything during the pandemic was impossible. And the responsibility became more for organizations that work for the transgender community. And what we did is, at Sahodari Foundation, what we did is, since we already have been working on art and craft projects, especially many transgender people were already working at home and creating paintings and artwork. And this usually we do at a stretch of 1 to 2 months, and then we actually go and exhibit it in universities, colleges, galleries, and spaces, public spaces and all that. And through the sales of these, we usually raise money. And that is 100% given to the community. They also sell paintings through our platforms. So one of the things that actually kept the community engaged, not everybody, but only those who were interested in art and craft and who were talented in that, only they were actually a little bit surviving. This is our story. This is not actually the entire transgender community story. The entire transgender community story is even worse. But because we were a little fortunate because of our creative skills, our community people were sitting at home and engaged in making art and craft. And we had hope, we had lots of time, we had our colors and paper and canvas and everything, and we started making art. So one of the issues during lockdown for the community is also the mental health. Many of the community people were, because of not able to travel, not able to meet other persons, it affected them so much. Already loneliness is a terrifying psychological thing for people like us, transgender people who have been living alone, who feel insecure because of not belonging to our family. And the lockdown put us even more lonelier, even more aloof, even more locked in our homes, and we couldn't travel. And as I said, only making of art actually helped us. So the community began to make art, and I do have some presentation on that, which I would like to share. Yep.
Kalki, would you like me to present?
Yes, I have some technical problems here.
All right, all right.
Thank you for that.
No problem. I hope I'm on the right slides.
Yes, yes,
All right,
yes.
great. Let me know when to go next.
Yeah. So art as a way of life for transgender persons during COVID-19. It's actually, the presentation is only a few slides to basically give an idea about how we survived. This is our community, transgender community story in India, and that too a group of us, how we survived. And the next slide, please. So art helped us, the transgender community, keep our spirits up. We did so much of writing and art making during the lockdown on our personal lives and our hopes for the future. Especially, it was also a time for us to look back at our lives and deal with our insecurities. Especially, many of the transgender people are victims of sexual abuse. So because of that, there is always that fear and rejection and all those feelings. So the lockdown helped us to sit and prod about how to deal with this and how to move forward without carrying the remains of the past and all that. So one of the projects that we do is the Red Wall Project, through which we have been talking to transgender persons, documenting their lives, especially the sexual, physical abuse that happened to them because of the discrimination that they faced and at families or at public spaces because of their gender identity. So trans people were speaking, writing about it, and it in a way helped open up their hearts and open up their lives to another person and who can understand better. So we documented more than 200 transgender persons' lives during this pandemic. Yeah, the next slide. For example, this trans women, transgender artist, Kala, learned, she has already learned during the workshops at Sahodri Foundation, and she engaged herself in making art for the purpose of post-COVID. So we all hope that the lockdown will end, but of course it never ends. It seems to never end. But fortunately, at least a few things have opened. For example, we were able to exhibit at galleries and other spaces eventually. Last month, we actually held an exhibition. The next slide. So art actually helped us not only in keeping us alive and engaged, but next slide. We actually did exhibit our art recently last month at the Bangalore International Center. Whatever we have done during the pandemic, we did an exhibition of the artworks and we titled it, "We Are Not the Others." The next slide.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think there are lots of questions that are coming up. If we could wrap up in a short time.
Yeah. 2 minutes, I'll finish. Thanks. So this is one of the exhibition images, this and the next. Yeah, these two are some of the images in the gallery. And the next slide. So this is me. I actually did a lot of Frida Kahlo's. And this is how I actually raised money for my financial stability as well. The next slide. And one of the things that the community also did is that keeping us beautiful, keeping us dressing up well, keeping up with the makeup and hygienic and everything, not actually being depressed. That also helped us to keep sane. Yeah, the next slide. Yeah, and that is the end of the slide, yes. So I would like to move to the questions now.
Thank you so much, Kalki. I think that was really very touching. What really came through quite powerfully for me was the general lack of data. And you made a very powerful point about, the limited government intervention. And this is something that probably, bridges our two speakers together. I was just wondering that whether it's related to lack of data and access and the invisibility and being on mute, as you very powerfully put it. I was wondering if those are the factors at play. We have a number of questions that have come in. I think I'll go to Dr. Bajwa first. I think there's a question, Dr. Bajwa, for you in terms of sharing some success stories and data from your perspective. And Kalki, there is a question that I think is of relevance to you about how do we make the society at large a lot more sensitive to transgender and LGBTQ community. I'll take more questions, but I think I'll leave these questions to you to answer first as I look at other questions.
Okay.
Dr. Bajwa, yes.
Shall I go first?
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So the question that you ask is how do we, could you come up with the questions? How do we educate?
Yeah, how do you make the society more sensitive to the transgender, non-binary?
Okay. One of the ways actually we should make the society more sensitive, not only to transgender individuals, but also to LGBTQI people, is that we need to change our education system at school, at college, at university level as well. We don't talk about LGBT rights in many of the countries in India, and especially not in many universities. Of course, in India right now, a few universities and colleges do talk about, do have curriculum on LGBT subaltern literature and LGBT rights and transgender lives, transgender literature and all that. But that I think isn't enough. We have such a narrowness on education, especially on gender equality. And we need to understand that, and we need to make our children and people understand that gender equality is not about women being equal to men. It's also transgender people being equal to everyone, whether men or women. Transgender and non-binary people should be treated with respect and should be allowed to exercise our human rights, civil rights, legal rights, social and economic rights as well. So I think it begins at home. The education begins at home. The sensitivity begins at the schools and colleges as well. And media is especially one of the top people we should be sensitizing.
Thank you, Kalki. I think that's a very important insight. Dr. Bajwa, if I may move to you for the question on sharing some of the success stories. There's also a related question around, how has the stimulus package that you mentioned worked?
So the success stories, of course, were before the pandemic, and there were many hundreds and thousands of very good incidences where women-led enterprises have really flourished. In the post-pandemic and during this third phase, I think the most important learning which we have found is that these enterprises which have actually stopped and they have actually been consumed. So whatever equity was there has been consumed. The women are still there, the entrepreneurial spirit is still there, and the will to work again is still there, and the experience is there. So what is lacking? The lacking is that the one thing which is lacking is equity injection into these enterprises which have stopped working. We have developed a product here in my country, and I'm very proud to say that IFA, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, they're also putting in. So what we were trying to do is give a grant equity, which means an injection of a small amount of money as a grant, but it goes as an equity, which means that they cannot consume this money. They can only use it to start up this business which has been affected. The stimulus package has helped in a very different way. The stimulus package actually helped in smoothening the whole issue of food security in the country. Because what happened was that immediately when incomes were dropped, people needed money to buy food. So that gap was fulfilled by that. And as a result of that, we don't see any impacts in terms of loss of lives because of this whole thing, loss of food for the children as well. So people were barely making, two ends meet. This stimulus package continues now in the form of this 2,000 rupees per month grant. And it goes to almost 30% of the entire population now. We call it the ESAS program or the Benazir Income Support Program. And that is a flagship social safety net program which goes on. But one has to distinguish between a social safety net program versus an enterprise program. And the enterprise program is the one which is going to sustain even the earlier one. And in order to jumpstart the enterprise program, the food for thought for perhaps most South Asian countries is look at these enterprises, see what has happened to them, and try to inject some equity into it. If it is a grant, that is the best. Even if it is not a grant, it can be a tier 2 injection, or it can also be equity participation. But think about equity. This is not the time to think about loans anymore. And this is the change which I see must be brought into the mind of the policymakers and the organizations which are in the business of enterprise development.
Thank you, Dr. Bajwa. I would like you to urge to think, if I have the time to come back to you, about the question on data that Kalki raised, data of marginalized communities. But I do want to come to Kalki now. Kalki, there's been a couple of very interesting questions, and I'm trying to merge the two. Someone has asked, one of our viewers have asked, whether the transgender and LGBTQ community have thought of art as a profession and not just as a passion, as a means for livelihood. And a related, slightly tougher question has been around whether the transgender community is not enough visible in the semi-skilled labor market. Would you like to take these two questions together?
Yes.
Art as profession, not just passion, and semi-skilled labor market participation by the LGBTQ community.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Art as a profession is definitely a possibility, and already we are seeing success. For transgender people who were affected because of the pandemic and who were actually economically affected, for them, definitely art helped. And that is also one of the times that they understood the realization of creativity and the practice of art and how it can actually save the community. So many transgender people, I'm not saying all of them, but many of them actually continued the practice of art, and whether it's acrylic or abstract or oil painting or watercolors, the creative spirit of the community was out during the pandemic, and especially the landscape that they did out of their own imaginations were actually very good, and they sold during our exhibition. Yes, art as a profession is definitely a possibility, and it is possible. Not only art, but of course, transgender people need to be given opportunities at all levels, especially in the area of arts, whether it's singing, dancing, acting, films, or anything. The second question. Yeah.
Thank you, Kalki. Okay, I'm afraid we've run out of time, but I think it's fantastic to have you and Dr. Bajwa with us. And Kalki, you actually live the example, what you were speaking about. I think you live that as an artist, as a very well-known artist, and a range of things that you do. So thank you, Dr. Bajwa. Thank you, Kalki, for being with us. We have run out of time, but it's been an absolutely inspirational discussion to host, and I've really learned a great deal from this conversation. So thank you, and all the very best. May you all stay safe. I think across South Asia we are witnessing another surge. So I think health and safety is uppermost in our minds. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and anybody anybody has any questions, they can communicate with me through social media. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that will be a great way to take this forward. Thank you.
Thank you
Over to you, Deepa.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kalkin. Thank you, Dr. Bajwa. Thank you, Devanjan, for this very quick snapshot of a fireside chat. I think we have about 535 people who have logged into and listened to you. So that was really great. We will now move to the flagship session of today's event, and that is a keynote address by one of the well-known leaders of our times, Ms. Vinita Bali. Ms. Vinita Bali is a business leader with extensive experience in leading large companies, both in India and overseas. She has worked with eminent multinationals like the Coca-Cola Company and Cadbury Schweppes in a variety of marketing, general management, and chief executive roles. She moved from a full-time role as managing director and CEO of Britannia to pursue her wide-ranging interests in the corporate and development sectors. She is a non-executive director on the global boards of Cognizant Technology Solutions and Bunge Limited. She was among 27 global leaders appointed to the UN in 2012 to improve maternal and child health as part of its Scaling Up Nutrition initiative, and completed her term in 2016. Ms. Bali has kindly consented to share her insights on the topic of women in leadership, taking us through her journey of becoming a global business leader, the successes and the challenges she faced, and what it has meant for her as a professional and an individual. I'm sure her story would be hugely inspirational for the audience, especially emerging women leaders. So, Ms. Bali, over to you.
Thank you. I think you need to okay. I am assuming I am being heard and being seen.
Yes, ma'am, clearly.
Okay.
Yes,
All right.
Hear you.
So thank you very much, and thank you very much for this opportunity. I came in towards the fag end of the earlier discussion, and it was quite riveting. I think the topic that you have chosen, which is really to do with, gender equality, etc., is a very important one. And I think it also tells us something about the times that we are living in, that in the 21st century, when we believe we've got answers to most questions, we're still struggling with issues of equality across all humanity. So it's not just gender equality, it is also equality of race, religion, socioeconomic group, etc., etc. So you asked me to speak about my journey in leadership, which I will, but I also want to say that, when we talk about women in leadership, the first point I want to make is that, certainly when I think about leadership, I don't think of men or women or, race or geography or anything like that. Because to me, leadership is agnostic. It is agnostic to gender. It is agnostic to geography. It is agnostic to socioeconomic, the classification or any kind of classification. Because leadership is a set of behaviors. Leadership is not a position. It is not a title. It is not an entitlement, but it is behavior. And because it is behavior, you can actually identify leadership behaviors versus behaviors which don't exude qualities of leadership. And what do I mean by leadership behaviors? It's actually quite simple. We see it all around us. Just because I am called a CEO or a president or a prime minister doesn't make me a leader. It is what I do in that role that makes me the kind of leader that I am. I can be an empathetic leader. I can be a leader that inspires fear. I can be a leader that inspires confidence. This is as true of businesses as it is of the academic world, as it is of any other world. So I would certainly like you to think about what I'm saying, and that is that leadership has nothing to do either with your position in the hierarchy or with anything else. My argument to that is that if I start off as a management trainee or as an engineer trainee or as a computer code writer or whatever, I can still and I must still exude leadership behaviors, which is about taking ownership, which is about taking responsibility, which is about taking accountability, which is about not making an excuse, which is about being empathetic. And when I'm talking about empathy, I am talking not just about cognitive empathy, but I'm also talking about emotional empathy. Now, if I were to just take these qualities, qualities of understanding and empathy, qualities of responsibility, accountability, ownership, and you juxtapose them to any women. The fact is that all women are leaders in their families because it is primarily the women who are keeping, their households and their families together through whatever hardship. But somehow, when we think of leadership, we think of large organizations, we think of people at the top of the organization. We in our own minds have given leadership a hierarchy. We've given leadership an organization. And my invitation to you is to think along with me, at least for the next 5 or 10 minutes, and think about leadership as not a position, as not a title, but as a responsibility, a sense of ownership, as empathy, as understanding, as, bringing people together. So I just wanted to start off with how I have imbibed my experiences and how I have created this conviction based on my experience that leadership is really about behavior, and you can exhibit qualities of leadership in your home, in your school, in your community, in society, as well as in the organization in which you work. So, talking about my own leadership journey, many times I get asked the question that, what goals did you set for yourself? Did you know that you were going to be part of the corporate world? And my answer to that is no, because I did not. In fact, if you had asked me when I was still in school and college, my goal was initially to become a pilot, then it was to become a neurosurgeon, then it was to join the Indian Foreign Service because I like to travel. And, guess what? I landed up in an MBA. And what happens when you are there is you get a job before you've even got your degree. And, that set me off on my corporate journey, which I must say was a very exciting journey because I got opportunities and I took those opportunities. I think I operated in the corporate world with a sense of curiosity and with a sense of adventure. And I never once thought about myself as being a woman in a world which was dominated by men. And I can tell you that I was the first ever woman who was a manager who joined Cadbury India, and this is in 1980. So we're not talking about 100 years ago. We're talking about, 1980 when I started working with Cadbury's. I was the first and only woman to go as sales and marketing director of Cadbury Nigeria. I was, the first woman who was on the board of Cadbury South Africa as well as Cadbury Nigeria when I moved to South Africa after finishing my stint with Cadbury's in Nigeria. I was the third ever woman in the history of the Coca-Cola company to be made a division president. Now, why am I sharing all this? Because, people get very excited when they they listen to these facts. But actually that is missing the point. The point really is that you get opportunities based not just on your gender, but actually based on the work that you do, the contribution that you make, and the way in which you make that contribution. So it is not just the how, the what of your accomplishment, but also how you have gone about accomplishing what you have accomplished. So I don't get ruffled walking into a room full of 40 or 50 men where I'm the only woman, because I have a conviction and a belief that I am there not because of the fact that I'm a woman, but because I have the right academic credentials, I have the right experience, I have the right track record, I have the right attitude, I have the right attributes to go in there and make a meaningful contribution to whatever the discussion is. And my invitation to all of you who are women in the audience is really to try this out for yourself. Walk into your place of work with the conviction that you are there because of the contribution you can make, because of the academic qualification you have, because of your experience and your track record. And don't think of yourself in gender terms or in any other terms. My invitation to all the men who are in the audience is to say that since there are many more men in positions that make decisions, and every organization talks about diversity and inclusion, I have yet to see an organization that does not talk about diversity and inclusion. And yet when you look at the numbers are pathetically low. The best of the best companies, not just in India, but around the world, have at best 25% women. And when you look at the senior management within those women, the number falls even further. You look at Fortune 500 companies, there's less than 10% of those headed by women. Why 10%? Less than 5% headed by women. Same as the story in India. In fact, the story in India is worse. So I think the question we have to ask ourselves is that when there are so many competent women, how come we as individuals, as society, as community, as people who are responsible in organizations are not giving them the opportunities that get them to do their best work? And I think for that, we have to turn to anybody who is in a position of authority, who is in a position where you are making decisions, and ask you to question those decisions. Are we operating with biases that are perhaps unconscious biases? In my case, again, I was fortunate enough. I personally never thought about it. And in the organizations in which I worked, whether it was Cadbury India, who first sent me overseas in 1983, when not many marketing people from India were going overseas to work, and I went to the UK. It was Cadbury again who sent me to Nigeria. It was Cadbury who asked me to go to Cadbury South Africa when the nation was opening up and the transformation was happening. This is in 1993-94. I then joined the Coca-Cola company in Atlanta. I was sent to Latin America, which is as macho gets, responsible for the duties of a division president for South Latin America, etc., etc. And I came back to India as CEO of Britannia, and there weren't very many professional CEOs, in manufacturing companies and marketing companies at that time. Now, I don't think that is the story. I think the story is what opportunities I was given, how I handled those opportunities, and how there was a system around me and how I created a system around me that recognized contribution without thinking of gender. It was a system that recognized performance without thinking of gender. It was a system that inspired and encouraged without thinking of gender. And I think in whatever role we play, no matter where we are, I think if we can create those kinds of environments, only then we will begin to see the big difference that all of us want to see, are desirous of seeing in ourselves, in the lives of our daughters, in the lives of our sisters, in the lives of people who matter to us. And I think each one of us, therefore, has a role to play in making that happen. It is not the issue of women. It is not the challenge of women alone. This is a challenge for society. This is a challenge for our communities. This is a challenge for our country and the world. And unless all of us participate in solving that challenge, in giving not just women, but everybody, all human beings, and frankly, the environment, which includes, the trees and the flowers that we have been given an abundance of, unless we treat the planet and its people and its inhabitants with respect and love and compassion, we will not be able to see the change that we are desirous of seeing. So I think I have, taken my 15 minutes, and I believe we have about 5 minutes for questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bali, for really those very inspiring words which you have shared and from your journey. There are a couple of questions, if I may. So there is a question from a person who says that how did you, with all these positions that you have held at, and being like the trailblazer, if you like, how did you handle the stress and emotion in your leadership journey in the workplace?
This is another interesting question, stress and emotion. Frankly, I'm not a person who stresses out because I think it doesn't mean that I am, very calm under every situation, but I don't think I have let work be a cause of stress. And I think that's another very important point. If you enjoy your work, then that enjoyment doesn't really create success. It creates challenges, and there have been plenty of challenges. But there is a big difference between challenge and success and stress. I also think that positive stress is a very good thing, because positive stress gets you to give of your best. So I think stress becomes negative when we feel that the situation is out of control, when we feel that we can't change the situation, when we feel inadequate. I think that's what causes stress. But a good challenge when, take COVID. Did anybody know how to handle COVID, irrespective of what organization you belong in? And yet you can see there are companies and individuals who've handled it really well, and others who are struggling through it. The difference really is in how we approach things, in our own attitude to what we do. So again, my invitation to you would be, don't let situations stress you out negatively. Positive stress is good when it is a challenge. And, figure out ways of relaxing yourself. If it is listening to music, going for a walk, going and playing a sport, working out in the gym, because those are very good avenues of distraction, which all of us need in demanding work situations.
Thank you, ma'am. I think there is one of the comments is that positive stress is a new learning for me from one of the audience has posted a comment. There is another question around mentoring and coaching. So you mentioned in your address that the representation of women in different levels, especially in senior levels within organization, is quite less. So do you think that mentoring and coaching programs and networking between women could be a sort of a solution, and are organizations doing enough to put these kind of measures in place?
No, organizations are not doing enough to put those measures in place, because if they were, then the numbers would be very different. So I'm being very blunt when I say that. Mentoring and coaching is fine, but I think women talking to other women is not going to solve the problem. We have to get mentors and coaches and sponsors who are men in organizations. And here I'm talking about corporate, universities, any environment, where you've got to take people who are in positions of authority and decision making, because they are the ones who are making those decisions. And I think if that demand doesn't come internally, the external environment is going to place that demand, certainly on business organizations. They've already begun to do that. And we will see greater and greater demands in terms of diversity, inclusion, ESG, etc. So I think organizations who are proactive need to very seriously think about this and say, how do we create equal opportunities? I'm not even saying more opportunities. I'm saying, how do we create equal opportunities for men and women in the organization so that the best individual, irrespective of that individual's gender or sexuality or religion or ethnic community or geography or anything else, let that not interfere with what is required to be competent in the job that you are being recruited for and promoted for.
Thank you so much, ma'am. There are a few other questions. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, and so we will have to conclude it here. I want to take this opportunity to really thank you for giving us your time, even though it has been a short, but it has been a very powerful statement and input that we have received. In fact, when you agreed to come on this summit, we felt it was a little bit of, we managed to pull off a coup, that we got really one of our star speakers to come and speak at this event. So it's been really amazing, and thank you so much for the sharing your journey and from the comments. I think most of the people agree that they have been very inspired by your leadership journey. Thank you so much. And we will move on to the next sessions now. We are having two workshops. This is for the audience. We are having a workshop on her safe space, about making the online and offline world safer for women and girls, and community-based strategies for the use of media in women's empowerment. So each of these workshop sessions, they are actually case studies led by our British Council teams from Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. The Safe Spaces workshop is led by our Sri Lanka team, and we've got some experts who are speaking at this event, and similarly the community-based strategies on the use of media for women's empowerment is led by our Bangladesh team, and they would like be giving you inputs on how these strategies they have implemented in there. So stay around and join us for these workshops. They are more practical and practice oriented. Thank you very much, and hope to see you at the workshops.
Hello, welcome everyone. I'm Sharika Kure from the United Nations Population Fund. I'm the National Program and Policy Analyst for Women's Rights and Gender. So I'm happy to be part of these sessions that British Council is conducting to commemorate the International Women's Day. Today we are going to discuss, as the previous speaker said, some case studies, and this is a case study from Sri Lanka, adapted to the British Council's Active Citizens model to address the issue of sexual and gender-based violence within the communities. This model encourages communities to take responsibility on social issues such as this. So before we start the discussion, I would like to provide a little bit of context to some of you. So we're all aware that sexual and gender-based violence is a grave human rights violation and a public health issue prevalent in every society and community. It highlights deep ingrained gender inequalities in each of our societies and has serious implications not only to the individual, the families, the communities, and the country as a whole. So this has now transcended to the online space as well. And we are increasingly seeing the voice of women and girls silenced due to the harassment in many forms, and which is increased due to the present pandemic that we are experiencing. This is, in Sri Lanka, the evidence indicates that 5 ever partnered women have experienced physical or sexual violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. 2 in every 5 women have experienced physical, sexual, emotional, or economic or controlling behaviors by a partner in their lifetime. 1 in 4 women and girls have experienced physical or sexual violence since age 15 by a partner or a non-partner. But we must understand this is from the national survey done by the Department of Census and Statistics in Sri Lanka. We must understand these statistics are just the tip of the iceberg, and the issue is much grave. So I'm happy that projects such as this are taking place, and I'm happy to introduce the project partners, the project addressing violence against women and girls, a community empowerment journey supported by British Council in Sri Lanka. So it is conceived and co-created with 4 key civil society partners, Foundation for Innovation and Social Development, FISD, and their implementing partners, Jaffna Social Action Network, Janata Action, as well as Youth Network, #Generation. So to date, the project has run for 18 months in 3 districts, which is Batticaloa, Hambantota, Jaffna, and Monoragala, to ensure women and girls have the skills, confidence, networks to contribute and benefit economically, socially, and politically, and being free from the fear of violence. Dialogues with service providers have been had, engaging men and boys have been part of the project. So before we invite our 2 panelists, I would like to now ask to play a little video about the project. Oh.
අපිට තවත් වැදගත් සංස්ථානයක් වූයේ යාපනය මොනරාගල සහ හම්බන්තොට දිස්ත්‍රික්කවල පවත්වන ලද දිස්ත්‍රික් සම්මන්ත්‍රණ මාලාව. සෑම සම්මන්ත්‍රණයකදීම මාස 10ක ගමන තුළ ලැබූ අත්දැකීම් පුවර්ාරු කරගන්නා ලදී. එතකොට කියන්නේ ನಾನು ಅಮೌಂಟ್ ಇರುತ್ತೆ அங்கேருந்து இங்க வந்தவரை இதுவும் பெண்களுக்கு எதிரான நடைமுறைகள் தெரிய வேண்டி வந்திருக்கோம். இங்க வந்தாலும் நிறைய கற்றுக்கொண்டு இனி நான் இளைஞர் பலகத்தில் இருக்கிறவங்க முதலாவது அந்த சேலம் மட்டக்களப்பு மாவட்டத்திலே அமைந்தது. அந்த சேலமருக்கு வருகிற பொழுது அந்த பிரதேசத்திற்கான எந்தவிதமான சூழல் அருமை அதுக்கு வந்த பிறகுதான் தெரியும் பெண்கள் மற்றும் சிறுவர்களுக்கு எதிரான வன்முறைகளை எவ்வாறு கட்டுப்படுத்த வேண்டும், இந்த சமூகத்தில் இருக்கிற பெண்கள் மற்றும் சிறுவர்களுக்கு வன்முறைகள் எவ்வாறு இருக்கிறது, இது போன்ற விளைவுகளுக்கான முழுமையான ஒரு அறிவு கிடைக்கும்.
Okay, thank you. As you can see from the project is looking at redefining violence against women and girls as a community problem and engaging a wider group of stakeholders. So we have two of our partners here, Samita and Senel. So now I would like to introduce and welcome Samita. She is the Director of Programs at FISD to give us an understanding, Samita, on to what strategies you will use to engage the local communities to address violence against women and girls, and what were the key learnings from this project? Over to you, Samita.
Thank you, Sharika. Good afternoon, everyone, and warm greetings from Sri Lanka. So since we don't have much time, I will try to skip through the slides and just give a summary of what we have done. As Sharika also explained, the project Empowering Communities to Address Violence Against Women was a community empowerment program which happened throughout the last 1.5 years to create a safe space for women and girls in selected communities. So as since this is a kind of, you know, like the project was like happening both online and offline, I will be more concentrating on what we did at the community level with the people, engaging people at the community level. It's a kind of a journey that we took with the women and young people at the communities that we selected to work with, depending on the kind of, you know, the priorities that these communities had, or the relevance or the prevalence of the gender-based violence in these particular communities as informed to us by different community stakeholders. So we actually did concentrate on community consultation And we actually had the problem analysis workshops with women and young people coming from these communities, because we actually, the organizations who took part in this project were already working in these communities on different aspects. The communities were already mobilized, and we actually mobilized or actually start working with the women and youth leaders who are already doing something for their communities. So that is how the 1.5 years or the 18 months process and bringing effective results makes sense. So working with these women and young people to map up the issues and prioritizing what interventions or what areas of work that needs to happen in these communities were a very interesting process. And the project, like just to mention that they had few stages where we had the problem analysis, where we mapped the requirements, and where we kind of engage the young people and women in knowledge and capacity building programs, and then kind of engage them in designing their own projects and implement the projects at the community level. So that was I think that was the triggering point in this project, where that engagement makes sense and that engagement actually make an effective environment for people to create a kind of create a change in their communities. So in the journey, the most important factor is that people themselves kind of try to understand the problem in their own through their own eyes, because otherwise when we go and tell them the problem, they always deny and say, no, we don't have that kind of problem in our society. Likewise, when violence becomes a private issue, people always talk about there is violence out there, but not in my own house, not in my own community. So those we also had the understanding that there is a denial from people's side. So that is why we wanted people to analyze their own problem and see it from their own eyes, and kind of design the interventions depending on their own capacity and depending on their own abilities to engage in. So because of that, the results were also owned by the community, women and young people. We, as Sharika also said, we actually facilitated the whole process through partnership, and that also makes sense. That also added on to the effective results, because the partners were covering the geographical areas, and they already had the experience of empowering communities on different other aspects, which they also used in this project. And also they had the ability to facilitate the stakeholder engagement in this process. The partners already had strong partnership with British Council and had a history of working on youth empowerment in different districts. So those experiences were very useful in designing this project. And the partners also had the national visibility and recognition, which helped the bottom up and the top down process, and engagement of different stakeholders from the community level as well as from the divisional and the district levels, from the government level to the other community level stakeholders. And also the partners brought the technical expertise to combine it with the active citizens methodology that we used in this project with the British Council's engagement. So I think just to mention the methodology of the whole process, where we actually developed the capacities of women and young people through active citizens methodology, cascading it to incorporate or integrate gender and GBV, and take them through the journey of active citizen youth leadership or the community engagement process, where women and young people developed or designed their own social action projects. So that being the methodology for this project, we actually, I'm just moving into the lessons learned, because the engagements were different, and the engagements were quite kind of, versatile by the young people and the women. But let me move into the lessons learned from the project. Where we actually, with the engagement of young people designing their own social action projects to intervene, women actually women were like, we understood that in the project, women were more focusing on individual household and community levels, while young people are looking at more societal level. The combination of these group interventions by young people, young and women, has thus had more effect in kind of, generating results because they were like, expertise, bringing expertise at both ends. The structured and the long duration training sessions aimed at addressing violence against women gave more time for reflections and ability to gain insight into the nature of the problem and effective project designing. We know that normally in a short-term project, we don't give much time to train people or to engage them in capacity development. But the specialty of this project is that this Active Citizens social development program was 5 days long training. And of course, it was very challenging when it comes to engaging women and young people, because to engage them in a long-term training program, to give them enough time to reflect, give them enough time to bring their own insights into the nature of the problem and, effective project designing, we actually has to cascade the training to accommodate the challenges faced by women. And like, giving them the transport, family, having the family discussion prior to the trainings, engaging men in the families at the community level before the training, and also kind of, focusing on group traveling for women and young people so that their mobility is more accommodated, and providing childcare support. All these had to happen to accommodate the long-term training, which actually had a very interesting effect on the project. So project designing actually to tackle was done to tackle the strongest and the harmful gender norms that was leading to violence against women. This whole project, our work actually emphasizes how vital it is to listen to what women and young people themselves have to say about their lives, and their options, their choices when it comes to creating the safe environment for women from violence. This whole journey showed us that empowerment is not only about changing boundaries of action, but also shifting the horizons of possibilities, because they were trying all possibilities, looking at all different ends where, when it comes to engagement, when it comes to reaching out to different categories of people, and trying out so many different approaches. This journey actually showed us that empowerment is not only about, through this journey, women and young people actually develop the ability to create new situations for their own communities, and create new conditions, and create new actions, and ultimately create their own story of success for their own communities. So those were the main points that I wanted to highlight, where, if you get the engagement of young people and women to design their own interventions, what magic it can do, what effects it can bring to the whole creation of safe environment for women and girls. So I'll stop there for the moment.
Okay, thank you very much, Samita. Indeed, it's very enriching, and it is important that the communities themselves own the projects. So as we have very limited time, I will now introduce our next panelist, that's Senel Wanyarachi. He's the co-founder and director of #Generation. He has been part of the online component of the project. So Samita spoke of the offline component. So Senel will give us an understanding. Senel, if you can tell us how did you complement the work on the ground level? And also please share with us some of the key learnings. So over to you, Senel, you have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharika. And thank you also to the British Council for this opportunity as well. I will also share some slides, and I will also run through them fairly quickly, just to give you a sense of what the campaign looked like, and then also what some of our learnings were during the campaign, what were some of the things that went well, and maybe what are some of the things that we could have done better as well. So we are hoping that maybe these ideas could also inspire some of you also in your own work. And even though we are from different, some of us are also from different contexts, I think there's also a lot we can learn from each other as well. So this campaign actually, as Sharika said, complemented the on-the-ground offline work that Samita spoke about. And the idea was that because we were working in several districts, one, to be able to share the stories from those districts, and two, look at also at this issue from a more national perspective as well. Those were kind of the two main objectives of this campaign that we called Her Safe Space. So for us, as the team that was working on the communications campaign, working on an issue that's really important, but also quite sensitive, it was a big responsibility as well. And it was something that we took quite seriously and considered with a lot of care as well. So the idea and thinking behind the campaign was that, of course, we can influence attitudes in the same way they were happening through the workshops, and hopefully influence people's behavior as well. And the approach that we tried to take through this is to actually amplify the voices of the participants of the workshops themselves. And I think this is slightly different from some of the other approaches, because sometimes what often happens is we also bring people who are either experts or intellectuals or academics or from civil society to speak about these issues. And often, sometimes the response to that kind of thing, especially online, is that we are trying to create an issue where it doesn't exist. Like the NGOs and the universities and the academics are out there to kind of create problems in the villages, in the households, in the towns, when actually this doesn't exist, when violence against women is not an issue. I think when we featured the women, the boys and girls, the divisional secretariat officers from these villages and towns themselves, talking about this issue as something that they were dealing with, something that was happening within their families, in their neighborhoods, in their communities, I think we were able to show that it was a real issue, and that it's also something that's affecting people's lives, but also it's something that people were doing things about in their community as well. Another approach that we took was that the whole campaign was also trilingual. So what that meant was that it was done in Sinhala, English, and Tamil. And particularly in Sri Lanka, language is a big barrier to access as well. So even for kind of people affected by gender-based violence, I think access to service can also depend on your ability to speak in Sinhala or Tamil as well. So for us, doing the campaign in the 3 languages also was very important. I understand this might be a little bit more difficult in contexts in other countries where there are maybe so many other languages, maybe then having even though we had subtitles in 3 languages, maybe having subtitles in more than that would be quite tricky. But for us, this is also something that was quite important. Another thing also was that we also didn't want to show the women and the girls that were getting affected also just as kind of powerless victims of GBV, but that also they were also doing things in the communities to address them as well. So it was not just kind of women were not kind of people with an agency that were only kind of dealing with this as an issue, but also they were doing things to actually solve this issue as well. And these were kind of some of the responses that we got. And of course, a lot of it is positive, but maybe the one that some of you can't read is in Sinhala and is a negative one, which is one that we picked as well. But basically, it resonates with something like the point I suggested earlier about kind of NGOs trying to create an issue where it doesn't exist. But I think that kind of comments which are negative are also important, because especially online, often content gets shared among people that agree with us only. So I think the moment I see negative comments in posts and videos that we share, that means it's breaking the barrier and reaching people that don't agree with us, which in the online world is actually quite important and difficult as well. So often we treat negative comments as trophies that we like to have in our kind of Facebook pages and things like that. So another thing that we did was also this booklet, which is also trilingual, where we documented the success stories and the learnings of the project, which I think is also something we in civil society don't do enough, documenting the work we do so that other people can then learn out of that and then replicate that. And maybe if we did something wrong, then not do that or repeat that mistake as well. So that was also something that we did. Again, the approach was to kind of share the photos and the voices of these people themselves that were kind of our participants and people that were getting affected, the men, the women, as well as the youth. I think one final thing that we also paid a little bit of attention, actually not really, quite a bit of attention also, is to language itself. because we know that language, especially when talking in Sinhala and Tamil, can also be tricky when we talk about gender-based violence. For instance, a singular word for rape is, at least one of the singular words for rape is dushana, which actually suggests something like being polluted. So then we also had to think about questions of how do we not use language that actually reproduce the same problems that we are talking about as well. So that was also something we need to share as well. Yeah, those were just some of the learnings that I want to share in this forum, but I'm happy to answer any other questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanil. I think very important learnings, especially in terms of the documentation and the evidence creation, because this is, I think, like you said, we can replicate this project, and also we are very effective in using the resources that we have, the minimum resources that we have for addressing these kind of issues, because we get very little, Samita, you would also agree, we get very little to address this issue. So we do have a few questions, but I think those will be addressed by British Council. So I would like to just give maybe 2 minutes to Samita and 2 minutes to Senel to just tell us a little bit more of what your final learnings from the final words from the project, and then we'll close the session as we have been given a very short time period. So Samita, first over to you, just your final words, and then to Senel, just for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Sharika. Just, to bring some of the recommendations from the project and to mention some of the way forward that we have taken. Of course, as Senel also correctly mentioned, and you reiterated that, documenting the good practices and the positive results are very important. And we noticed that when we had at the final phase of the project, when we had the national consultations again with a kind of a symposium to share our learnings, these recommendations actually came from either from the stakeholders or from the community, women and young people from the communities. So documenting positive results and good practices is very much needed. And also, just to mention again, I mentioned that earlier, the combination of, when you are working at the community level, the combination of bringing women and young people together is very effective. We have noticed that in all the social action projects that we have done, because women actually bring the true nature of the problem, because they are the true victims. And also, of course, I mean, I'm not saying that the youth are not the victims, but, women can visualize it more because they have been living with the problem. And also they actually brings their own experiences, of course, both negative and positive, on how to deal with it. So and combining it with young people who brings the new thinking, the innovation, the ability to take bold steps and break barriers and use the technology, all these things actually blend together to create a very positive result. And also kind of, to understand and identify the strong harmful gender norms that kind of, exist in our socio-cultural practices and in traditions in the communities is very important, because we noticed that even at the end of the project, although we try to address some of the norms through the social action projects, some of the very strong harmful norms still exist. So in the way forward, working with the communities, we actually again map out these existing harmful gender norms to take the project forward in different steps, and also to check the factors that reinforce these negative gender norms, and also like to identify the gaps that kind of limit people to access resources, access services. That is also something that we are looking at the next phase of the project. And finally, just to mention that taking the project forward, we really need to address the current trends, COVID-related violence, and also, in this current context, to put more attention on the cyber violence and the gaps in the communication the way that we communicate violence. So those are the aspects that we will be looking at in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Samita. So I'll just give it to Sanel for just a minute or two to tell us about the way forward and also how the digital space is increasing and how we can reduce the gender stereotyping in the digital space as well. Over to you, Sanel.
Thanks. Thank you, Sharika. Yes, as earlier I spoke about how we were able to use the internet to kind of tell the story of this project. But as you rightly said, the internet is also a space where the kind of issues that we're talking about also happen, where gender-based violence happens as well. For instance, part of the work that I'm involved in also is monitoring for this type of violence. For instance, with Valentine's Day just last year, there were groups and pages that just popped up just to share kind of unconsensually intimate images of their kind of partners and so on. So it is also a place where this kind of violence happens, but it's also a place where people are using positively on the other hand as well. It's a place where kind of women, girls, queer people are using to kind of claim space, meet like-minded people, celebrate their differences, and kind of engage in activism and so on as well. So it's a space just like in the offline world that people are using, of course, positively, but also as violence is happening as well. I think one of the bigger issues is, of course, access, which is because technology, the devices, data, and so on are still quite expensive. So people need to kind of be able to access them, access these spaces as well. And finally, I think there are also gender-based barriers for access as well, where kind of girls especially, but also women are not allowed to be in these spaces, particularly by their kind of older people in their families, by the men in their families and so on, which is restricting the use of these platforms. So I think all of these are things that we need to think about, but maybe things that a lot needs to be spoken and done about as well. But thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Sanel. Thank you, Samita. I think we just have 1 minute to wrap up. So thank you to both of you. The next session is going to start. So I wish you both and British Council all the best in the next phase of the project. And like Sanel said, the online space is increasing, and that is, I think, the gap that was identified on how we ensure that we have mechanisms and systems to support so that women are not silenced, because most of the time, anyone can be anonymous on social media, and then they can create a lot of harm, because we feel that just because it's online that women are not, women don't feel this, but it's more abusive. They feel it physically and mentally as well. And they would change their location, they would change their numbers. And I mean, it is a basic right at the end of the day. So thank you for everyone who was listening to us and from the wonderful case study on Sri Lanka. So we will be signing off now, and we will give the floor to the next session. So have a good evening, good afternoon, and thank you for Sri Lanka, and we are signing off. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sharika and the team from Sri Lanka for sharing your experiences and the case study from Sri Lanka. I think you made very valid point that, you know, the world of the internet is vast, and this whole idea of safeguarding needs to be taken very seriously, especially now that we are more and more dependent on digital technology to remain connected with each other, as the pandemic has shown. We will now move to the final session for today, and it is an extremely relevant one to each one of us. This is that concerns our planet and sustainability. The issue of climate change is an important aspect of our discourse on gender equality. Women and girls living in poverty are particularly affected by the consequences of climate change and global warming. Although they are more often in charge of making their families have access to fuel, water, and food, they tend to be underrepresented as climate decision makers. The upcoming session will explore the issue of underrepresentation and related inequalities, the role that women have played and can play in leading response strategies to address climate change. To lead this session, I am pleased to introduce to you Dr. Shehnaz Karim, Director, Society and Arts at British Council, Bangladesh. She is also the South Asia lead for British Council's Global COP26 program. A senior development professional with over 25 years experience of working in Bangladesh and internationally, Shehnaz previously worked as Chief of Party for the Charter Centre's Advancing Women's Right of Access to Information project, and as team leader for the World Bank Strengthening Public Expenditure Management System. She has held senior positions at the Asian Development Bank, Transparency International, Institute of Governance Studies, and BRAC. She has taught at the University of Dhaka and BRAC University and has worked as a consultant for a number of international organizations, including the World Bank, USAID, DAI, and MSF. Shehnaz holds a PhD in Development Studies from the University of London, as well as a Master's in International Relations from the University of Dhaka. Under her expert moderation, I'm sure that we will get some deep insights into the issue of women's leadership in building climate resilience. But before I hand over the sessions to Shehnaz, a reminder of a few housekeeping rules. The session is for 40 minutes and will end at 5:20 India time. There will be a buzzer sounded at 5 minutes before the session is scheduled to end. There is a question and answer section which audience can use to input their questions to the panel. And I would like to remind the audience again that the session is being recorded. Over to you, Shehnaz.
Thanks very much, Deepa, and welcome to the special forum on women's leadership in building climate resilience. Now, climate change is one of the greatest global challenges of the 21st century, and climate change impacts everyone, but it impacts women and men very differently due to a number of reasons. There are existing inequalities and gender-based roles and responsibilities, and of course, due to various socio-economic and cultural factors. So all around the world, women are very disproportionately affected by climate change. And in order to build a truly climate resilient society, we must ensure women's participation and women's leadership in climate change adaptation, mitigation, and resilience. But in order to do that, we need to understand and acknowledge these differences before we can plan for adaptation and resilience. From our eminent panel members today, we will hear about both the downstream and the upstream issues in identifying and operationalizing solutions to these issues. It's a great pleasure to introduce our star-studded panel. From Bangladesh, we have Dr. Tasneem Siddiqui, founding chair of Refugee and Migratory Movements Research Unit in Bangladesh and professor of political science at the University of Dhaka. From Pakistan, we have with us Ms. Kashmala Kalakhel, climate finance specialist and member, Women in Energy, Pakistan. From Sri Lanka, we have been joined by Dr. Ananda Malavatantri, country representative of IUCN, the International Union of Conservation of Nature in Sri Lanka. So my first question today is to Dr. Tasneem Siddiqui. And my question to you, Dr. Tasneem, is if you would tell us about how climate change impacts women's lives and livelihoods, especially in light of climate-induced migration. And we would also like to hear from you, from your many years of experience in working in this area, how to support and empower women to build climate resilience societies at the community level. Thank you.
Thank you, Shehnaz. Thank you for inviting me. I'll start by saying that, any impact of any issue, it's usually like you can look at it through gender lens, you can look at it through class lens, ethnicity, race, religion, all these lenses are important. And gender is one lens when it comes to climate change, I think is very, very pertinent. So from there, if I start by saying that we know that 140 million people will be displaced due to climate change by 2050. If we say that, then automatically we know that half of it or more than half of it could be women. But any research that we do internal migration when comes into the forefront, when it is when you talk about climate change related migration. And then you will see that in the number of women, the face of women when it comes to urban locations will be less, it will be men more. But then again, if you try to probe into issue, you will see that there are sectors which are invisible and where women are dominating. So therefore, it is very important when you talk about climate change and displacement or other form of migration, you look at it through a gendered lens. So in the context of Bangladesh, if we come, what are the stresses? We know flash flood, we know, floods or cyclone, earthquake, all these things are problems that gradually accompanies migration. So conceptually, if I want to talk about gendered sort of impact of climate change, the first thing we must say that climate change is not directly always linked with displacement, but those who are in a socially and economically in a situation not so much in par with the mainstream, they are the one who are affected more. So gender comes in from that particular lens, where you will see that socioeconomic inequality make women a group more vulnerable to all these stresses that men are also facing due to climate change. That is why it is important that to understand gendered impact. So if you, if we just go into, recently we have done a research on climate related migration in Chattogram, and then they came to Chattogram city. And when you look at Chattogram city, what do you find? That men and women have migrated equally. Their numbers are quite high, but then again, domestic work and other areas where they're employed, they're invisible. You can't see them. And then what happened that when we ask them to take photos of what they want, what are their stresses in case of climate change, and what actually they would like to do about it. So if I share their understanding, that will tell you that you do need a different type of policy intervention for women or for men in the same kind of socioeconomic situation. It again has to be dissected by gender. So women, what they took the pictures of, access to relief during disaster or carrying potable water, these were the major problem they would identify. And men would identify that during disaster, when you don't have access to loan will be their main thing they would highlight. But women would highlight water, women would highlight food, and again, whenever it's a homestead, effect on homestead, women highlights it's the homestead, and men highlights it's the agricultural land, which is their livelihood. So these two, they would differentiate. And why homestead? It is not only because of it is the shelter on top of your roof, which is important to women. It is also equally important the vegetable patches and others you have beside the room, which by the side of the room, which provides certain food and nutrition to the family. So whenever there is a disaster or any other event, climatic event, so these are the things women miss first. And now let us again, if you differentiate it according to those who migrate from plain land and those who migrate from hill areas, again, you do see women are different. Women identifying in this case where they're living their insecurities, workplace insecurities, this thing more by sort of land women. But then again, those who migrated from hill areas, they would say places for congregation, places for, you know, going together with other people and then sharing their common ideas, even religious place. They would say that, you know, ethnic community, they don't have access into urban locations. So again, you will see that lack of privacy while bathing, long queues for using toilet, sexual harassment, lack of childcare facilities of those who are working, who have come due to climate change into different locations, they will highlight those issues more. And men would highlight precarious work condition, lack of tenured job, fluctuating income, police harassment. These things will be highlighted by them. So the solution men need and solutions women need in a climate change situation is also different. Again, if you bring in the children, there as well you will see male children and female children will have different type of need during the time or in normal time. So I will just concentrate from here on the second issue that you have asked. It is how to bring in women into decision making. See, the thing we have used, the photo elicitation, we have used photos male and female migrants have taken. And then when we sat with the policymakers, and policymakers had completely different idea about climate change, what needs to be done. Their thing was waste management. Their thing was road congestion and other things, too much migrant in urban locations. So when you mix these three, and when you give equal voice in doing anything that you are doing, then definitely all these voices will come in, even including children. So it is important that we, the women, are represented in decision-making when climate issues are discussed. And there is a policy now in Bangladesh, national strategy on climate-induced internally displaced person. In that strategy is very much gendered, and that strategy everywhere, the inclusiveness includes women in every step of the policy. So I think when you develop policy and then you develop implementation strategy, resource allocation and everything has to be equal, and certain affirmative action at the beginning has to be there to ensure their participation, and gradually it will take over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tasneem Appa. It's, you know, when you talk about how climate change impacts men and women differently, how it differs from location to location, urban to rural or hilly areas or, you know, plain land, it's you know, the plight of these people, it becomes so real. What you just talked about was that representation of women in decision-making is crucial to identify the right solutions, because the impact is very different. I think that brings us very nicely to my next question to Kashmala, and that is on women's involvement in and access to environmental management resources. So Kashmala, two questions to you. One is on representation of women in climate governance, and also challenges women face in accessing climate finance. So these are the two questions to you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank the British Council for inviting me to this very important discussion. And thank you very much, Shinas, for your questions. Let me answer your question to help set a context. I will give you an example. Let me take you to Kathmandu, Nepal, where I believe the green public transport is not new. Women have been driving hundreds of electric three-wheeled 12-seater buses for, say, the last 25 years. But now what is happening is that these vehicles are rusting in garages because the owners cannot find the money to buy more durable and also more costly batteries that now need to be on the road, that are now needed to help put these buses and continue to keep them on the road. It's women like these,
running small businesses at this scale who can actually become your face to tackle climate change, but are not being given the enabling environment to do so. Now, let's understand this clearly. We all know that women are disproportionately impacted by climate change at the local level, and we've all been discussing and understand, and there have been researches, etc. There might be multiple reasons for this. And in order to answer your question, I just want to focus on one aspect of all these problems that we're facing overall. When we talk about women and climate change, we tend to lock ourselves in a discussion downstream on the problems that exist at the local level. We don't try and look for solutions upstream and try and engage at the table where actually money is being discussed and money is being allocated. So it's becoming very clear now that it's climate finance which is actually going to dictate whether we're going to alleviate poverty and or gender equality, or we're actually going to exacerbate both of these things. It's becoming very clear now, because that's the discussion needs to be taking place at that level, and that's where the entire spectrum of decision making is happening all the way down. Now, let me try and qualify this statement with a couple of statistics before I move to 4 takeaways from my conversation in answering your question. The statistics are a little dated, about 5 or 6 years old, but the reality hasn't changed. If we look at it even today, if we compare, the percentages will still be the same. So a study that was carried out on bilateral trade by about 24 developing countries about 5 years ago, what we found out was that 29% of that assistance targeted gender equality. But when you actually look at the 29%, what you actually saw was that only 3% was targeting gender equality as a principal objective, whereas the 26% was looking at it as a secondary objective. Right from there, it's very clear. Now you understand the money that you're allocating to the problem, which is so huge at the bottom of the pyramid, is peanuts. So you realize exactly where the problem is. If you don't address the problem at that level, it is clearly cascading into issues that we've been talking about, and Dr. Tasneem has very eloquently explained the issues that we're having with migration and other issues. Now, I would like to put in 2 more statistics over here before we look at the key messages from what we need to be looking at from a financial perspective when it comes to women and climate change. Finance for adaptation has a much stronger focus on gender equality as opposed to the finance that is available for mitigation. Of the total, again, I'm looking at the same statistics from about 4 or 5 years ago, but the total climate finance related aspect for adaptation was about 46%, and the target for mitigation was only 19%. So within that, you can clearly start seeing, once you start putting these numbers on the table, you immediately start seeing where the problem is and where actually the solution needs to be focused on. When I say 46% to the adaptation side, within that, the real focus has been on agriculture and water side, which makes perfect sense because that's where the problem is. That's where you need to engage women. This, of course, needs to increase, etc. But the problem then comes to the mitigation side, where only 11% women were involved, or gender was taken as a strand on issues related to energy, and only about 12% on issues related to transport. So this clearly shows you the segregation of where the problem, even when we are talking about the limited resources that are being allocated to women and gender issues to solve at the local level, we can immediately see within that where the focus is. I'm not saying that focus is the wrong focus. What I'm trying to say is that the focus needs to broaden. With that sort of, with that number and that example at the context, I would like to offer 4 takeaways that we can then further build our discussion upon. Again, the first one is obvious, where I say, yes, adaptation is very important. That's where the negative impact is. We actually now need to start thinking about how we involve women and give them the opportunities to participate in the green economy, greening of economies, and primarily supporting focus on development projects where women will have equal say and equal decision-making in renewable energy and clean technology solutions. This is through giving them skills. This is actually giving them the tools to be able to contribute to the economy and support the transition
between from a fossil fueled economy worldwide to an actually clean economy, which we are ultimately, hopefully, all trying to move towards. If you don't involve the women at this stage in the mitigation aspect of things, it will be very difficult to catch up at a later stage. So within that, the money clearly shows us where our focus needs to be. So that's number one. Number two, something that we need to start advocating for more from an upstream level is that the money that the contributing partners currently contribute to causes on ground is usually through the MDBs. The push, the advocacy needs to be is that we need to start advocating for money to be channeled not through the MDBs, but the actual multilateral climate funds that have now been set up through different streams through the Paris Agreement and the UNFCCC first, and now, of course, the Paris Agreement. What happens when you do that is that these funds, the multilateral climate funds that have been developed, they have very stringent they have very stringent gender policies. While not perfect, but at the same time, at least you are giving at least some voice and some say in ensuring that if this money does come through this channel, it will automatically be liable, it will automatically have to fulfill the criteria of the gender policy that so many governments have sat together to develop and ensure that money is spent in the right way. So again, an upstream problem that we need to start looking at and trying to start offering solutions on is that work with contributing countries to move their money from MDBs, which generally they're not liable. They don't have the World Bank, for example. I don't believe they have a specific policy which is mandated on gender, where they're allowed to develop the projects as they are, with not such a strong component for on gender just support, and that clearly then reflects in the numbers that I just explained earlier. So very important to actually start advocating and pushing for money to be spent, to be channelized from the MDBs to the funds that have now been created for this particular purpose. The third supplementary issue, the third supplementary takeaway on this one would be that when we generally talk about financing opportunities, what people will tell you is that, you know, regardless of the gender, anyone can get the finances if they fill the requirements. Now that's a big if, right? These requirements are actually easier to meet if one is experienced, they have their business, they have properties, and then they have a savvy social network, right? And then they have access to financial instruments. And institutions. So in theory, men and women have an equal playing field, but in reality, we know that it's much more harder for women to actually be able to be in that position. So while what I said earlier in my second takeaway, we continue to negotiate and push countries to get money to come through multilateral support facilities, but at the same time, we should advocate and push for our national as well as international governments to actually invest directly in grassroots women-led organizations, specifically targeting their capacity building, imparting technical skills, giving them specific tools and techniques where they're able to actually start contributing to the economy from a mitigation point of view, in addition, of course, to the support that they need to build their resilience, etc. And then finally, my last takeaway is interesting research is that we always see that when women were not informed or involved at the beginning of any climate change action, the result was always a negative impact on the sustainability of it. So the money that was actually put on a climate finance for a climate action project, ultimately because women were not involved, their voices were not heard in the process, the sustainability only lasted till the project lasted. It didn't have a life of its beyond. So which is why I feel, and generally something that we advocate all the time, that it's very important and it's critical that we normalize the need for a monitoring system that actually measures the impact of financed activities through a gender lens. This will actually give you a clear case for involving women in climate-related interventions for both adaptation and mitigation. So you actually have a baseline, you actually have some sense, some lessons which help you understand that when you actually involve women, the impact is much more positive, and
no rocket science. It's something that you should be doing from the get-go. But of course, once you have data, once you have research, once you actually have a baseline in front of you, especially from a sustainability angle, you immediately start looking at the finances from a different lens then, and you start involving women in the entire design process, of course, in addition to the execution and the actual monitoring of such interventions on ground. I will stop here and happy to take further questions and a discussion. Thank you very much, Shanaz, over to you.
Thank you very much, Kashmala. Some excellent takeaways there and very practical solutions, especially on the last point that you made on on monitoring climate finance activities through a gender lens. This again highlights the importance of gender disaggregated data, without which we cannot really design or put in practice gender-focused interventions. Thanks again. So the last panelist of the day is Dr. Anand, and I'm not even going to try and pronounce his last name again. I'm sorry I messed it up the first time. So Dr. Anand, thank you for coming. And my question to you, again, two questions. One is if you would talk a little about the impact of climate change on women, on women's role in building up community resilience. And the second question is, how can we design and implement gender-sensitive climate policies to deliver more sustainable and equitable change? Thank you. Dr. Anand, you're on mute.
Thank you, Shanaz. I think Tasneem and Kashmala pretty much help my few thoughts. And I did have a presentation. I don't know whether I can share the screen.
You can share your screen if you want to. There's a share screen button at the bottom. Should be green.
Somewhere down the road, I'm having a little bit difficulty. Okay, I got it. Hopefully you should get it now.
Yes, I think we can all see it.
Thank you so much, and thanks for inviting us too. And let me start saying a couple of things about the global picture. If you see, the general trend is that most of the disasters and most of the climate impacts are water related. That brings to the angle that most of the women related activities are also in a way water related. So it could be drought, it could be floods, it could be landslides. And our thinking in getting them involved in planning, as Kashmala said, and also into the policy is probably start around water is one thing, and Kashmala rightly said the energy is the other one in the development. So those two areas pretty much need the gender angle into the focus. All right, so let me have some statistics that on a study funded by UNICEF recently in Sri Lanka, you see, and we were involved. This considered droughts, floods, and landslides. And these are the observations came through a number of areas from Sri Lanka aggregated. When you are faced with climate related disaster, the loss of appetite for food is high in women, and the health deterioration is higher. These are not, I would call it, some are significant, some are not that significant, but the trend is then the fear of further disasters. You are impacted, but it might recur or you might get hit again. So it's high in the minds of female. And the physical environment, I think it was highlighted by Tasneem, the safety aspect. So it was very widely expressed in this. And the temporary migrations, going and living with relatives, friends, is very high among women. And the housework, the load significantly goes up when you are impacted with the climate related activity. So this actually brings us into a whole different dialogue. I think Tasneem said the lens. I think this provides us a bundle of lenses to look at interventions and forward thinking. And on the same time, I think one of the questions is like how you motivate and how you work in the. So one another angle, I think this is another couple of data coming from that study. This more school children oriented. You can see the school attendance got reduced in kids, female kids more than men, obviously for safety reasons, and then the part alarming to us is the loss of interest in education, because I think that tells a lot. Because if you go in that path, that's probably is not what we wanted to see. And the loss of school books, the notes and the bags, and so that's again high in female population. So there might be a lot of reasons. But when it comes to engaging youth and girls, and in the in climate sense, we work a lot on the nature angle in the societies. And one thing we realize is that the need to improve the understanding of the climate impact and the soil, water, climate processes behind the climate. Because it's if you know, then you are empowered to say something and get involved in design. Part of the problem we see in the communities and also at the high level is the lack of knowledge also preclude you from being a good designer or a good planner. And then the science sometimes overwhelming. The climate science is overwhelming. How do you take it down to the simplified level and empower people? I think it provides us a lot of opportunities to bring this nature-based thinking towards resilience. As one example I wanted to throw from Sri Lanka. Now Sri Lanka has this cone shape. The center is high. That's where we have the cloud forest, where the rain is captured, the cloud capturing and the slow infiltration, and then going to the rivers and streams, and at the end ending up with in the ocean. Now, the droughts, the floods, the landslides, the sea level rise, all those things are part and parcel of this problem. So if you don't manage the hill slopes, the land degradation, and all that, so it again comes back to the part mitigation and adaptation together. So the question comes, how do you take this kind of knowledge to the policy level and to the grassroots level and get people to explain, okay, in order to do the cloud capturing, you need to have the trees. So if you do the deforestation and cut down trees, and then if you do the land degradation, you will have more silt in the reservoirs and tanks than water. So your hydropower and your power, the agriculture water and all those are affected. Then the whole mud, the silt goes to the ocean, that impacts the food cycle of the fish, that carries a lot of chemicals also. So these kind of knowledge in a simplified manner, and also at the same time, we have advantage of female being a good conduit to the knowledge, to the family. So taking advantage and providing that knowledge, I think part of the things, I think part of the answer, the question you posed, and the other part is how do you bring this change in climate? What our experience, among other things, I think most of my work and my presentation is related to the nature, but we can extend it very easily. You take the nature, it provides a lot of services and the regulating services that we need for our survival, and also the cultural services and the supporting services. Now, how do you get the gender focus into that? I think Kashmala touched upon this on the multilateral money. Recently, we worked on a Green Climate Fund project. The way we convince Green Climate Fund was saying that all these are going to get affected by climate change. And as a result, the poor people are going to be more poor, and they are going to be subsistence farmers will be more inclined to destroy the nature. And then as a result, it's going to have a spiraling effect. So these kind of simplified things that gives and empower everybody, society, but in particular, the women in decision making, and pushing the women to decision making with these kind of tools can be really helpful. One example at the community level, we experienced this work we did with ILO recently on flood affected areas. We immediately realized that there are a lot of products in that area that lack technology and knowledge. So the simple syrup making, they need temperature and preservation technique, packaging material. So all this knowledge helped them to build enough cash so that they can use that in the flooding times and things like that. Then the planning, and then innovative ideas on doing many things that suits that particular climate and the ecosystem, and then put people's resilience on the high. So in community level, pretty much is the knowledge and the planning capacity, enabling them to do more savings, and also home gardening. That really, there are a lot of home gardens that really help people to access food during the disaster time, climate-induced disaster times. So the nutrition levels didn't go down. So these are some of the examples, but all these things need science, the knowledge, technologies. Sometimes the cutting edge technologies needed to be transferred with good packaging and preservation techniques so that they can even reach international markets. And these people did reach international markets. Now they are doing a lot of eBay selling. Now coming to the policy level, I think we don't see much female in the policy level. I think that's one of the things that are missing badly. Now, this is one example we are really proud. Shiromani Jayawardena, who's a climate scientist in the Department of Meteorology, who is telling us how the trends, how the things change in the country during the past and how the things will be into the future. But I think we saw from Madam Vinta Bali to the two colleagues spoke just before me and our moderator. Now, how do you take your experiences and encourage the youth to adopt the same paths and take, I think this, what I'm trying to do is to missing of the role models to follow and to take basically hand holding. I think that's something that we are trying to encourage, but it had been a difficult task with the busy schedules. We know some people, but we need to somehow get them to impart some of that knowledge. So I think probably I may not have answered all of your questions, Shehnaz, but probably I think this might be a good entry point for our discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ananda. You're right that climate science is quite overwhelming for the layman. I was looking at your slide on the ecosystems, and I'm like, wow, 4 or 5 different things that I never knew about. So, and when you say that building climate resilience at local level, there is a need for knowledge and a need for technology. Those are things we kind of tend to overlook because, when you think of home gardening, homestead gardening, there's no rocket science, but, the use of modern technology and knowledge can yield better crops. So definitely we do need to address that in building up climate resilience at local levels. At the policy level, again, of course, there's not enough representation of women, and there is a need to build up more leadership to address women's needs and women's concerns. So thanks very much. We've had a number of questions from the chat. I will read them out. So one question was, what are the direct negative impacts on women of climate change? The second question is, any gender differentials by health issues due to climate change? Any data on how many women know about renewable energy? And importance of public health lens in addressing climate justice to help displaced people. I will start with the last. We don't have a lot of time, but I think we can take 5 minutes, Deepa, if we can. So if I can direct this question, importance of public health lens to Dr. Tasneem Siddiqui. The importance of public health lens in addressing climate justice to help displaced people. And I think we can all, I mean, I'll have to be very stringent with time. If we can just each take 1 minute to answer the question. Thanks. Dr. Siddiqui.
Sorry, I don't work on health, so I wouldn't be knowing much about this. But from a layman perspective, I can say there are access to healthcare services, and whenever it's women, even in the origin area or as also in the in the destination area in the context of migration, then you will see that they usually do not access healthcare services. And then mental health, if you bring in along with, physical health, you will see that disaster and other things, the type of trauma, psychological stress that it brings in, those things are hardly treated. And that is also in case of children, I have seen, like girl child, when you see that, a family is in two places, one in the origin, one in the urban areas, and the loss at certain protection and other things, then they have two types of, manifestation. Girl child try to solve those through taking herself more into inside the house and not treating the thing. But boy child, we have seen, they go out, play, do things and try to manage their mental health. So these, I would say there as well, a lens that is required. And I'll just in one line, I will say about the negative impact. The most negative impact from the perspective of migration is trapped population. Women are in many cases trapped into areas which is physically unlivable. I think that is one thing we have to bring out more into our discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I think that's a very important point that you raised about the mental health, because we often don't think about mental health. We think about the physical discomforts and physical illnesses, but that mental health, especially for displaced population, that's a huge toll it takes on them. And that is something that also we need to address. Thank you, Dr. Siddiqui. If I can, is there any data available on how many women know about renewable energy? Dr. Ananda, would you be able to answer this one?
Well, I can try, but I think I don't think it's a knowledge thing. At the household level, yes. But when it comes to the policy level, I think it's very limited. Now, for example, now Sri Lanka has a lot of potential for wind. If you have the wind, you can convert that into hydrogen and make it a hydrogen economy. But the person at the household level probably do not know the whole story of the technical potential, as well as how that kind of policy decision by a country, how that will change the whole life spectrum of the things. So I think that way, there's a lot of knowledge gaps. If I may, I can add to the earlier question. In climate, one of the areas that we don't know much is the temperature rise. Because the temperature rise is tied up to the vectors and the diseases, and different organisms grow at different speeds. Certain organisms will not survive at certain temperatures. So there are a lot of unknown areas and important areas. That also true for the crops and the other things, other living organisms. So it's a very important area for us to work on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ananda. If I can direct my last question to Kashmala. The question was, what are the direct negative impact on women of climate change? And I would like to turn that around a little and ask you, if women fail to access climate finance, what will be the long-term impact on women in mitigating or or adaptation, mitigation, resilience on climate change?
Thank you, Shehnaz. Before I answer this question, I would just I'm respecting the paucity of time, but I just wanted to give some percentages on the question before that. Overall, in the energy sector, you have about 22% females contributing to that sector, which compared to the renewable energy sector, it's about 32%. So you can, it's just a good way of looking at how women are actually looking at the renewable energy sphere as an area that they can contribute to, which generally the energy sector has been seen as a male-dominated sector by and large. Coming to your question, so basically what we need to understand is if you take longer in including women, you will ultimately have to. Ultimately, you will realize that one of the solutions to combating climate change, or including not just women in the resilience space, but actually in the mitigation and the contribution to the overall economy space, is through support from women. If you don't do it now, you will just waste time. So you are just increasing the amount of time that you get to it, but ultimately, sooner or later, everyone will have to realize and come to that conclusion. Just in the process, you would have wasted a lot of time, which you could have actually done much more consciously if you start involving them now, as opposed to say a decade or two later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kashmala, Dr. Tasneem, and Dr. Ananda. And with that, we come to the end of this session and end of the first day of this regional networking event on leadership for gender equality. Deepa, shall I go straight on to the summing up, or do you want to take a minute here?
No, that's fine, Shehnaz. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So I'll just, so today we've had a number of sessions, and what has been really brought home is that the value of inclusive and resilient socioeconomic structures that has been brought home by the pandemic. It's true that we've come a long way in bridging the gender gap in South Asia, and the shift, the trend is in the right direction, but we still have a very long way to go. And it is women's leadership that will accelerate this journey towards gender equality. In the session, we started today's event with a leadership forum, insight into the experiences and ideas of South Asia's most influential leaders. And so we heard how the position of leadership is used to bring it should be used to bring positive change rather than perpetuating power dynamics patterns. But unfortunately, even when there are women women leaders, they sort of tend to perpetuate those power dynamics. And we've heard how transformation of society can begin with one individual. We've heard, based on what we have been able to do so far in terms of education and empowerment and support innovation, we have heard that the way forward for us is to focus on gender sensitive leaders. It can be a man, it can be a woman, but they must support equal opportunities and accord due respect. Tackling climate change by educating and investing in the young generation is of paramount importance as we move forward. This is a very different generation of digitally connected young people. They're very tech savvy, regardless of whether they're living in Mumbai or in a remote village in Bangladesh. So that is something we need to take advantage of. And we've also heard that we need to document stories of innovative leadership and share those as a shared resource to analyze and strategize and design ways forward. And we owe it to ourselves, we women, to go and get what we want and what we need. The session 2 of today was on the pandemic's differential impact on gender equality. We saw how it has led to, the pandemic has led to, on one hand, on an increase in workload and at the same time, to a loss of livelihood. We also heard from the transgender community about how the pandemic has impacted them. The third session was a spotlight keynote on women in leadership. We heard from Vinita Bali, who said that leadership is a set of behavior, not a position, and certainly not an entitlement, which leaders tend to forget once they are in these leadership positions. So Ms. Vinita said that leadership is about taking ownership, it's about taking responsibility, it's about being accountable and having emotional empathy and ownership. So these are very strong lessons that have come out of today's session. And during today, we've realized that we have given leadership a sort of like a hierarchy. We've given it an organizational structure, whereas it's a set of behaviors. We need to come out of that mindset and view leadership very differently. The next session, we had 2 parallel sessions. One was on safe space, both online and offline. It was led by Sri Lanka. And then we had another session on community-based strategies for use of media in women's empowerment. This was led by Bangladesh. And the last session of the day was the most special session on women's leadership in building climate resilience. For tomorrow, and I would like to thank all the panelists who took part in today's sessions from the morning. And for tomorrow, I would just like to remind you all that we have another session. It starts at 2 p.m. Indian Standard Time and Sri Lanka time, at 1:30 p.m. Pakistan time, 2:30 p.m. Bangladesh time. We have sessions on how representation matters in all aspects of life. We have a session on women in STEM. We have a very, I would say it's going to be a very emotional session on the shadow pandemic, understanding gender-based violence in the post-COVID world. And we will wrap up tomorrow's session. We will wrap up this 2-day event with a valedictory session. And we are calling it Towards a New Decade of Reaffirmed Equity. Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of day 1. And we hope to see a lot of you, if not all of you, at the session tomorrow. Thank you very much. Over to you, Deepa.
Thank you. Nothing further from me to add. Thank you to all the panelists for this really amazing afternoon that we've had. 3.5 hours of at least I was rapt attention and listening to everybody and absorbing so many things. And I'm sure the audience also has really learned and taken a lot of taking away a lot of information, awareness about all the different sessions that we had today. So just a final thank you and have a great evening, everybody, and whatever time of day you have joined in across the world. And don't forget to tune in for day 2 tomorrow. See you tomorrow.
Just want to mention one more thing, Deepa, that these sessions have been recorded. So if anyone has missed any parts of it due to a bad connection, they can listen to it later.
Thanks, Shinaz. Bye, everyone.